Ashley, a young, pretty waitress, bustled between tables, taking orders and serving refreshments. Her nimble movements and friendly smile attracted the men's eyes. But she didn't seem to notice that her thoughts were far away. She glanced anxiously at her watch, wondering if she'd make it home before her husband, Jason, went on his long-awaited fishing trip. Ashley's in the clouds again. The stern, middle-aged receptionist called out to her. "You see, the visitors are waiting." Ashley perked up, hurriedly adjusted her apron, and hurried toward the company at the far table. As she walked, she replayed the conversation she'd had with Jason. "I'm going on a 2-night sleepover with some friends," he said. "Do you have to go away for the weekend, Jason?" Ashley asked with a little resentment. "I thought we were going out tonight. Like to a movie or a coffee shop." "Oh, come on. What movie?" Jason dismissed the movie with a carefree smile. "It's summertime, and it's a sin to be in the city. When else will you get out with your men? We'll relax and fish. We'll boil some soup, like we should." "Well, maybe I'll come with you," Ashley suggested hopefully. "I'll keep you company and get some fresh air." Jason hesitated for a moment, but then laughed. "Come on, you're not fishing. It's a man's thing, not a woman's thing. We don't take anyone there. Have a rest, and we'll be there and back in no time. Don't worry about a thing." "At least I'll call you once in a while," Ashley sighed. "I'd be worried." "Oh, come on," Jason smiled indulgently. "It's not a good connection. I'll tell you all about it when I get back. Why don't you go shopping, go to the markets, have some fun? What's there to miss?" He winked and left the room. Ashley gave him a wistful look. A bad feeling stirred in her chest. Something's not right. Why is Jason suddenly so eager to go fishing, and he's not even asking me any questions? It's weird. But she didn't dare object to her husband, too accustomed to indulging him. "Jason's such a solid, well-off man. How can I refuse him?" she said, though a worm of doubt lingered inside. "But my husband's been missing a lot of late nights lately, with meetings and negotiations. And now even for 2 days to leave for 2 days, he decided to go. Caress from him like a nail from the wall. He mumbles something or laughs. At least he brings money to the house. So I can't complain. He bought a new car and a fur coat. But lately there's been less money. But it's understandable. Jason's company was going through some tough times," he said. Ashley sighed heavily. "I don't know, maybe I'm just overreacting. My husband's been out with his friends. Who doesn't? Probably the connection there is really lousy. Let him rest, everything will gain strength. He's entitled to it by status." She will finish her Saturday shift and go home. Time will fly by, and Jason will show up Sunday evening, cheerful and alert. In the meantime, my husband was absorbed in the pleasant task of packing. He whistled cheerfully as he went through his gear and put his wading boots, thermos, and freshly bought spinning rod in the trunk of the new SUV. A carnivorous grin shone on his face. He had his wife wrapped around his finger. "Nothing. Let her suffer a little for prevention. I'm going to have a good time with my new girlfriend. That's another thing, hooked up fire girl. And most importantly, no strings attached." After dropping off his things, Jason pulled out his cell phone. "Hello, Jennifer Ann. Hi, it's Jason. Yes, about the lake house. We made plans with you for this weekend, remember? I just want to make sure everything's okay with the reservation." There was a nice woman's voice on the phone. "Of course," Jason has agreed. "And your wife is here, by the way. The house is all ready. I've cleaned it up. The linens are fresh. We got a great view of the lake. You'll see for yourself. So come and relax in comfort." "That's nice. They're eagles." "Jason, wait, I'll be right there. And this. Thank you for understanding." "Oh, no problem. You're welcome." The woman was clearly smiling into the phone. "I can see right through people. You and your wife need some alone time. A little romance, so to speak, to rekindle the romance. Come on down." Jason took a drink and passed out. "Well, you got to be alone with your wife. If only the owner of the lodge knew the truth. However, for an extra fee, anyone would know the truth. Ashley's better off not knowing. Let her stay home and cook. That's what she's supposed to do. It's called being a wife." Jason walked quickly down the stairs and headed for the car with his fishing rods in hand. He bumped into Ashley on the doorstep. She was coming home from work, flushed from the smells of the highway. She looked very excited. "Girl, did you decide to go secret fishing after all?" she asked, looking into her husband's eyes. "And maybe I'll go with you. Weekend after all. Well, maybe together?" "Come on," Jason waved her off without anger. "I promised the men. I can't let them down. If you want to invite your friends over, you can sit and talk." He took the pike out of the bag and walked lightheartedly to the car. Ashley gave him a wistful look. "Why don't we get some girlfriends together? We could sit around and talk. Only she doesn't have any close friends. And to be honest, she's just friends, nothing more. She's given her whole life to family life. I mean, how can she make friends?" Ashley went home and made dinner. She didn't like eating at cafes. Not because of the paycheck deduction. It was just that homemade tasted better. "I'll do without shopping," Ashley thought. "First paycheck to buy something? Treat myself? What fun is that?" She started to get ready before she left. She couldn't resist dialing her husband's number. The subscriber was unavailable. She threw the phone away in frustration. Ashley resolutely slammed the door shut. "It's okay. I'll try to get through the next 2 days somehow. I'm not a little girl and I'm my own boss. I can do what I want." The self-compulsion didn't help much, but there was no choice. I just hoped the alarm was false. Jason loved her, after all. He wouldn't cheat on her for nothing. Her husband was already on the highway, driving out of town for what was sure to be a fabulous weekend. April's going to be so excited. I bet she's been waiting. She missed him. He longed for her hot kisses, tender hands, and unbridled passion. Life is good, and it will be even better. Home to the place he'd arranged. Jason parked at a neat log cabin on the shore of a forest lake. The scenery was marvelous. Not a soul around, just what he needed for solitude. Turned off the engine. He stretched until his vertebrae crunched and squeezed his eyes shut, warming himself blissfully. Anticipation came in hot waves, but everything now could be relaxed to the fullest. He climbed out of the car, stretching sweetly as he went. April was already waiting for him on the porch. Tan, slender in a light-colored sundress, she smiled dazzlingly, flashing her snow-white teeth. "That's my old barrel and wobbled already when I was driving. Well done, my soul." Jason winked playfully, picking the girl up in his arms. "How about we go for a swim, and then we can go on?" April laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. There was a sly sparkle in her eyes. "Sounds like fun. Let me feed you lunch first. You must be hungry from the road." "Yes, I am." Jason picked up on that, kissing her fragrant neck. "But I don't have an appetite for food. So let's start with dessert." Laughing happily, the couple disappeared into the cabin. Jason felt 10 years younger. Almost 24 hours of bliss. No remorse, no boring wife to worry about. It's beautiful. Ashley's heart was pounding in the city. The new dress, of course, was pleasing to the eye, but she couldn't escape the oppressive feeling that something irreparable was happening. But there was no choice. The only thing left to do was to chase away the gloomy thoughts and spend lonely evenings within the four walls. The house was not home without her husband. Sighing heavily, Ashley ate dinner without appetite and sat down in front of the TV. The cheerful faces on the screen were accompanied by upbeat music. It didn't make her heart feel any better. The log cabin by the lake was a happy place. Jason and Alina, looking forward to 2 whole days of freedom and solitude, were in high spirits. The hostess came by and brought berries. "Have a good rest." Thanks to her, Jennifer Ann, Jason smiled as he hugged Alina. "My wife and I are very happy. We try to keep things in order." As soon as the hostess left, Alina laughed and playfully nudged Jason in the side. "Oh, you're with your wife too. What about Ashley? If she'd known, she'd have bitten her elbows." Let her bite her elbows. Jason dismissed it with a nonchalance. "I told her I was going fishing with the men. So she believed me. She's an idiot." "Do you know how sneaky you are?" Alina pretended to be indignant. "And what am I then?" "An alternate airfield." "You're my queen," Jason said, pulling her to him. "The one and only. And Ashley's just a misunderstanding. You know, for status, We can't get divorced now that everything's worked out so well, can we? The couple laughed merrily. Satisfied with their idea, Jason took Alina in his arms and spun her around the room, kissing her face and neck. She squealed with delight and fought back. The lovers decided to go swimming. The lake was cool and quiet. The scent of pine needles wafted in the air. Jason and Alina, holding hands, walked leisurely along the shore, anticipating how they would plunge into the clear surface and then lounge in the sun, sipping cold wine. Beauty. But the idyll was suddenly broken by an unexpected boy's voice. "Hey, are you here to fish too?" Jason turned around irritably at the sound. At the water's edge, right in front of their house, was a boy of about 10. He was sitting on an overturned bucket with an old fishing rod in his hands, staring curiously at the couple. "Hey kid, what are you doing here?" Jason frowned. "Trespassing on private property without permission." "With a permit," the boy said cheerfully. "I've been fishing here every day for the summer. Jennifer Ann says it's okay. She says you can come anytime and there's plenty of room for everyone." Jason whistled. "That's quite a room. They didn't need a witness in here either. The kid might see something he didn't want to see, and then he'd spread the word. It's a rumor mill." "How's the bite?" Jason decided to turn his anger on Jason. "Sure," as the boy nodded happily. "Grandma's got it," Alina said with a sympathetic click of her tongue. He was such a little orphan, but he already had a lot to worry about. Not like some of the others, I'm sorry to say. Jason was embarrassed too, but for a different reason. He didn't like all that snotty charity. There was nothing to be sorry about. He's feeding his grandmother. He's used to being handed everything on a platter by other people's uncles and aunts. "Listen, kid," he began resolutely. "Couldn't you fish somewhere else? It's awkward. People have come to rest, and here you are with your fishing rods. There's plenty of room. Look for a free place." The boy clapped his eyes in surprise. "I always fish here. It's the best place. Big fish are coming. In other places there are only small fish. Not enough for soup." "It's better than this," Jason began to boil. "What are you getting so worked up about? We're looking for privacy, romance, and you're right here. Get out of here." The boy shrank back and fell silent. Big tears ran down his cheeks. He got up without complaint, picked up his fishing rod, and tried to walk away, hanging his head. "Jason, what are you really doing?" Alina said reproachfully. The baby wasn't bothering anyone at all. "Oh, the baby's taking it." Jason teased her. "Now there are dozens of transgressions." "Then I didn't dare. I don't need a daycare center in my neighborhood." "Well, think about it." He turned and strode toward the house. On the way, he put his arm around Alina's shoulders. She glanced guiltily at the boy she liked, but obediently followed his lover. Jason knew better than she did, and he wouldn't advise her to do anything wrong. She sobbed with resentment. Walking down the dusty path with his fishing rods, tears welled up in my eyes. All sorts of bitter thoughts came into my head. Why did that uncle pick on him? So what? A rich man spoke out. He probably has no children himself, so he doesn't understand anything. If his mother were alive, he wouldn't have to go around looking for food. Grandma's lost it lately, so he's got to get around. At first, Aiden wanted to wait for the bus at the bus stop nearby, but then he decided that it was better to walk. It was only an hour later, and the boy sighed and walked along the road, occasionally wiping his wet cheeks. The fishing line was trying to get away, but what did it matter now? The sun had long since risen by the time Aiden reached his yard. With a heavy heart, he climbed up to the third floor of the old Khrushchevka and timidly turned the key in the lock. Grandmother Barbara Adamson was waiting for him, as always, in a chair by the window. "See, he's back," she rejoiced, spilling out her wrinkles with her clean hands. "So how was fishing today?" The boy sighed heavily and lowered his eyes. "Caught nothing. I was chased away from the lake. They said I was disturbing the rest, you see. And in other places there are only small fish, but it's a shame to even catch them." Grandma sighed sympathetically. "Oh, my onion sorrow. And who was so heartfelt to speak out?" "Some rich man," with a girl, Aiden said. "They've rented Jennifer Ann's house, but it's all right, don't mind them." his grandmother consoled him. God will judge them. Unscrupulous. It's not your fault. You're a good boy, you look after me, you're growing up to be a provider. You'll see, there'll be a holiday on our street. Meanwhile, she sighed and got up from the chair and went to the kitchen in her shabby slippers. Let's go and eat what God sent us. I made potatoes and pickles in a pickle. Now we'll fight until you go fishing again on Monday. If you come early, you might catch something, before the tourists come. Aiden nodded obediently and followed his grandmother, dragging his unfortunate fishing rods behind him. Maybe tomorrow would be a better day. In the meantime, potatoes and cucumbers. She herself better not lie down on an empty stomach, or her guts will play all night long. If only Mom were alive. What can I say now? Despite her best efforts, Ashley's thoughts kept returning to Jason and his mysterious fishing trip. It had been almost 24 hours, and she hadn't heard a word from him. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. Maybe he's out with his friends and he's having a blast. She's been worried sick. At some point, when there weren't many customers, Ashley couldn't stand it and decided to call her husband. It was ringing, but no one was picking up. She stubbornly called again and again until she heard her husband's cheerful voice. Hello. Why are you calling so persistently? I told you we're almost out. Jason, do you even know that I'm okay? Ashley begged. I'm freaking out here. What if something happened? Oh, come on, Ashley, he said nonchalantly. We're fine. Did you have a great time fishing? Oh, it was great. We're getting ready to go home. Good, Ashley sighed, trying to suppress a bitter resentment. You get some rest too. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Okay, kisses, Jason said cheerfully and passed out. Ashley glanced at the silent phone. She had no choice but to wait and hope for the best. Jason grinned and tucked his smartphone into his pocket. He wasn't on the lake shore at that moment, but in a fish store. Jason was choosing the right fish for disguise. What kind of stuff? The good stuff. He admired it, pointing his finger at the counter. You'd be hard-pressed not to take a beauty like this. It's good for booty. He bagged a couple of pieces. The saleswoman nodded, hiding a smile. She knew very well that these fish were not from the lake, but from the local farm. But the customer is always right if he pays. Why would a man want fish? It's obvious. It's a long-established pattern. Jason paid, and on his way out he almost knocked over a kid. Be careful, kid, the man said. Are you going to hurt someone else? The boy's head snapped up and Jason gasped in surprise. It was the same Aiden from the lake, the little brat who'd just recently had to be reprimanded for his curiosity. Aiden recognized his assailant too and froze with his mouth hanging open. But then his gaze fell on the bag in Jason's hands, and his eyes squinted suspiciously. Weren't you fishing? Uncle, he asked, perplexed. Why would you buy it at the store? That's none of your business. Jason ventured, feeling the blood rush to his cheeks. Didn't your grandmother teach you that you shouldn't pester grown-ups? I was just asking, he shrugged. Why are you so angry? Jason gritted his teeth. But he didn't say anything, waved his hand at the boy, and walked out of the store, slamming the door. What a truth-teller. I don't want to start a rumor in town. I'd deal with him too. Jason got in the car and checked the fish first. 3 large silvery beauties, still bright-eyed. Good for bait. For proof of a successful fishing trip. The wife's bound to be curious about the results. Here's the trophy. On the way home, Jason imagined the touching story he'd tell Ashley. How he and the men had fished until dawn, then cooked soup over a fire. How they'd almost missed a catfish like this. It's a beauty. You'll see that the scope of his stories will forgive his frequent absences. He's trying to make up for lost time. Jason came home in a high spirits. Ashley was still gone. He breathed a sigh of relief and began to prepare for her arrival. First, he proudly placed the dead fish on a platter and in the refrigerator. Then he changed into his home clothes and poured whiskey into a glass for a bit of fun. I had to create the atmosphere of a hearty dinner. He sat down in the kitchen with his feet up and waited for his wife, figuring out where to begin his story. At that very moment, Ashley was scurrying between tables, taking orders. It was a very crowded evening at the cafe. There was a lot of people in the cafe. Some demanded menus. Others complained about the cold coffee. Others were fussy, not knowing what to choose. Ashley could barely keep up with everyone. The receptionist also cast disapproving glances at her every now and then. She didn't smile enough, or she wasn't happy with the evening. Ashley breathed a sigh of relief when another guest appeared at the door. An old woman in a modest dress and shawl, looking around timidly. She was holding an old bag. Ashley gave her a friendly nod and hurried toward her. "Good afternoon. Please have a seat. Can I get you a menu?" "Hello, sweetheart," she smiled weakly at her grandmother. "No, I didn't come to eat. They say I need people here. I was wondering about a job." "A job?" Ashley was surprised. "You've never hired an older person to work in a cafe, have you? It's not easy for young people, and it's no place for them." "But I'm still strong," she nodded. "I can wash dishes, sweep the floor. I'd only need part-time work. I won't take much. It's hard to do it alone. At least I'll earn money for bread. I've got one grandson, and I'm with him. My name is Barbara Adamson." She was silent, and Ashley felt a lump in her throat. "Look at you, Grandma. I guess she's had enough of it if she's looking for a job in her old age, and it's not for the good." "Wait a minute." She nodded firmly. Ashley nodded, not hiding her relief. "That's good. Maybe it would work out. I mean, I have to raise my grandson and get him back on his feet. The pension is a pittance. How can you survive on it? In September, back to school. Textbooks, notebooks, again for Johnny. I need shoes of some kind." Meanwhile, Ashley made her way to the receptionist's office. "No, why? Can't we help Grandma out? At least let them do the dishes. It's not a lot of work, but she won't starve in her old age." "William Michael," she began firmly, approaching her superiors. "Here's the deal. Grandmother came to us asking for a job. She wants a part-time job washing dishes, scrubbing floors. Let's take it, shall we? It'll be a help after all." The administrator came in like a toothache. He looked questioningly at the arrived grandmother and shook his head. "What are you doing, Ashley? Where are we going to get this kind of staff? God forbid they die on the job or slip. You might as well answer for it." "No, I don't think so. Let him sit at home, get his pension and knit white socks. And we don't want anyone like that on the job." Ashley opened her mouth to object, but looked at her grandmother's tight lips. She couldn't work at her age, could she? It would be a waste of her health. Sighing, she waved her hands guiltily. Barbara Adamson bit her lip and nodded. She knew what she was doing. Who would want her? An old wreck. She'd dreamed it for a second. Well, it wouldn't be the first time. I'll move on somehow. "I'm sorry," Ashley muttered frustratedly as she came closer. "It's just not working out. The bosses don't like it. Maybe I should try somewhere else. I mean, it's a real mess around here, you know." "Thank you, my daughter," smiled sadly at her grandmother. "Thank you for your trouble. It's all right. I'll look for tenants." She was about to leave, but suddenly she realized. "Oh, honey, I'll tell you what. Why don't you come over for tea sometime? You're uncomfortable, aren't you?" Ashley was embarrassed. "Don't be embarrassed," her grandmother told her sternly. "I'm inviting you from the bottom of my heart." She dictated the street name and house number to Ashley and wrote it down on a piece of paper just in case. Then she got up from her chair and strode out, dragging her bag. Ashley stared after her, biting her lip. But what kind of life was this? She slammed her towel down on the counter in frustration and went back to her work. There was no need to write up the case. It was still a lot of work. But what about Grandma now? What will she live on? Would she really have to go begging? Ashley yanked her apron up and ran after her grandmother, catching up with her at the exit and taking her by the hand. "Wait, Grandma, why don't you come back tomorrow? It's just today is a mess. You see, the bosses are on edge, and tomorrow the owner will be Linda Paul. She's kind, so I'm hoping she'll be understanding. I'll explain everything to her and ask her for any job we can find for you." Barbara Adamson shook her head incredulously. "No way, honey. only to embarrass myself once again in front of the big bosses. Oh, come on. Ashley shook her head. I've got hands and feet and a good head. What are you, not an employee? What time can you be here tomorrow? I'll meet you there, okay? Grandma exclaimed and hugged Ashley. Thank you, my daughter. I'll never forget your kindness. God bless you. Well, God bless you. Ashley was embarrassed. Run along and we'll talk tomorrow. Granny nodded and hurried out the door. Ashley felt a lump come up in her throat. It was like that you lived your life and there was no one to help you. It's good if kind people come along and lend a hand. And if not. Before she could finish this thought, the door of the cafe opened again. On the threshold stood the old boy with fishing rods. Hello, he smiled shyly, shuffling from foot to foot. Didn't you have my grandmother here? Such an old one, in a shawl? Yes, Ashley nodded. She just left. You? Aiden, you must be the boy shining? Aiden, how do you know? Grandma, your job was looking for you, Ashley sighed. But it didn't work out. The bosses are against it. Aiden, panic. Head down, she's understandably desperate. She said, I'll go anywhere. As long as I can earn my bread. It's hard on her and me, you know. Ashley pressed her lips together sympathetically. It's not easy, but you're doing great. You go to school and help your grandmother. And your parents? At the mention of his parents, Aiden shrank back and looked away. They're gone. They're dead. I don't remember them much anymore. It's just me and my grandmother. She looks after me. Ashley's heart ached. It was a terrible thing to be orphaned at that age. At least her grandmother had the strength to raise her grandson. And now he's looking for a part-time job in his old age. Their life. She gave Aiden a reassuring pat on the head. But don't worry, it'll work out somehow. I told grandmother to come tomorrow. The boy nodded gratefully. Thank you. You can't imagine. We need all the help we can get right now. I'll help Grandma come to you tomorrow. He smiled shyly and turned to leave. Ashley's cell phone rang loudly in her pocket. She apologized and reached for the phone. The screen showed a picture of Jason, tanned, smiling, holding a huge carp. Aiden slid his eyes over the display and then froze, his eyes rounding. Oh, I know that. He was fishing on our lake. Well, as fishing, he chased me away from a good place. And then he bought a whole bag of fish at the store. Ashley blinked. What are you talking about? What lake? My husband was going fishing with his friends and they fished there themselves. Why would you buy it at the store? Aiden threw up his hands. I don't know, but I definitely saw it both at the lake and in the store. Then I wondered why I'd drop it at night and go to the store. Ashley felt the heat rising to her cheeks. What the hell was that kid talking about Jason? Like he was suddenly buying fish at the store. That can't be true. He's never taken a big fish. That's how he catches them. Aiden must have gotten it wrong. Or maybe he's mistaken. She resolutely dismissed the stupid thought and disconnected the call. Come on, I need to hear you out. You're so worried, poor guy. You must be mistaken, sweetheart, Ashley said softly. My husband doesn't store at stores. He's a fisherman. Look at the trophies he brings home. She turned the screen of the phone toward the boy and jabbed her finger at the picture, but Aiden shook his head stubbornly. No, I'm not mistaken, I'm telling you. It's him. I saw him at the lake and at the store. I remember him. He was big, bald, and had a loud voice. He scolded me and chased me off the shore, and he was there with a net. Something inside Ashley just snapped. It's a perfect match. The height, the build, the baldness. It's definitely him. He's got a temper. He's never satisfied. So he hasn't been fishing all this time? The phone beeped again. Ashley glanced at the screen. Her husband must have waited, poor thing. Gritting her teeth, she dropped the call and turned to the boy. He was staring at her, guilty and confused, as if he were not happy that the truth had come out of his mouth. Thank you, Ashley forcefully said. I think you've opened my eyes. I shouldn't have trusted that liar for so many years, but he's not going to get his fishing trip back tonight. Oh, really? The boy was scared. "I didn't mean to upset you. Maybe I really mixed up. But there are such people bald, angry. How many of them are there?" "No, good for you," Ashley smiled sadly. "You can't run away from the truth. It's about time you opened your eyes. I've believed it for so many years. But I'll get over it. I'll tell you what, run along. Don't be upset about anything. The next day you'll come together and we'll look for a job for you." Aiden nodded sullenly and wandered toward the door. He felt tormented. It was as if he'd told the truth, but it didn't make him feel any better. He'd upset such a good aunt, destroyed her faith in her husband. Maybe he shouldn't have opened his mouth in the first place. If he'd kept his mouth shut, everything would have stayed the same. Who knew? Ashley stood in the middle of the room, staring blankly at one point. Her mind was filled with angry, bitter, desperate thoughts. How could it be? But how dare he fool her for so long, make a fool of her in front of everyone? Who does he take her for? A fool, no other way. The phone was ringing incessantly. The husband must have sensed something wrong. It's understandable he's already come back from fishing and his wife isn't home. Suspected something. Nothing. Let her be nervous enough. I've already danced on her nerves. No more. Ashley picked up her bag and headed for the exit. Enough. She was going to deal with this cheater, and she was going to tell him what was on her mind once and for all. And then she would see. After all, it was not on this mess brood, it's not her to clean it up. With these thoughts, she left the cafe without looking back. A difficult conversation and complete uncertainty awaited her. But one thing Ashley knew for sure was that she wasn't going to live with the same old lies and innuendo. At first, she'd wanted to calm down, enter the apartment with a nonchalant air, question Jason, and listen intently to how he'd handle it. And then make a scene, nail him to the wall with hard facts. See if I could nail him to the wall. But as soon as Jason's cheerful face appeared on the doorstep, Ashley burst into tears. All the resentment, all the suspicion, came rushing out in an unstoppable flood. "You're a liar? You scoundrel. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you'd keep telling me lies? I know where you've been and who you've been with." Jason stood frozen in place, mouth open like a fish. He was still clutching the bouquet. I guess he'd saved it for his wife. But now the flowers looked pathetic, not touching. "Honey, what are you doing?" He squeezed out, flapping his eyes incomprehensibly. "What fly bit you?" "I was fishing, you know. I brought back a catch." He nodded at the impressive carp on a platter in the middle of the table. I'd taken them out of the refrigerator ahead of time. "A catch? What do you mean?" Ashley snorted dismissively. "I know all about your fishing now. What lake were you on? What mermaid did you have fun with? What a fisherman you are. All you can do is stick your rod in other people's holes." Jason's eyebrows went up in surprise. "Honey, what are you talking about? What mermaids? What whirlpool? I'm in there with men, with men." "Don't be ridiculous," Ashley laughed evilly. "They saw you at the lake. Not with men, but with a girl. You were having fun with her and making me look like a fool. And then you went to the store and bought some fish to distract me. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Jason staggered backward. His mind raced with thoughts, one more ridiculous than the next. Who could have seen him? Could it have been Jennifer Ann, the owner of the vacation home, or a random passerby from the lake? He'd thought it all out so carefully, he couldn't have gotten it wrong. And there didn't seem to be anyone in the store. Wait, what about the kid? But the kid couldn't have ratted him out. Or could he? As Ashley watched her husband fretting, it only made her angrier. "What? You didn't expect me to find out? Were you thinking of ways to get out of it? It's too late, honey. You can't get away with it now. I know everything. I've had enough of your lies. I don't want to be a laughingstock anymore." She snatched her sweater off the rack and headed for the door. Jason finally came to his senses and rushed out the door. "Ashley, wait, you're..." I'm sorry. I was out with some friends. We had a little fun with these girls. But it's not serious. You're my wife, and you're the only one I love." Ashley paused, brushing aside his annihilating stare. "Love? If you loved me, you wouldn't go out with me. That's it, no more games. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to, and I won't. Goodbye." She resolutely swung the door open and stepped out into the stairwell. Her husband jumped out next, trying to hold her by the elbow. "Ashley, where are you going? Out for the night? Come back and we'll talk." "Well, you want me to get on my knees?" Ashley pulled away from him like fire. "No thanks. It's a deal already. And you're probably used to kneeling in front of that mermaid of yours, aren't you? I don't want to see or hear from you again. Go to her." Shaking the elbow of her husband's hand, Ashley ran down the stairs. Jason froze on the landing, confused and angry at the same time. "But I should have done something so stupid. The police are what he needs. That little kid. But wait, puppy." Meanwhile, Ashley was flying down the dark streets, unable to see the road. Tears filled her eyes. Resentment was tearing her chest apart. Where to now? Not to spend the night on the street, really. It is shameful to go to acquaintances, they will laugh. And there's no chance of gossip. Suddenly, she remembered Barbara Adamson's words about lodgers. Her grandmother had said she'd like to rent out a room. What if she'd be willing to stay for a couple days? I mean, she's got nowhere else to go, and Ashley won't be in debt. She'll pay me back. She wandered around the courtyard a bit, found the right doorway, and timidly rang the bell. The door opened, and behind her stood Aiden in his pajamas, yawning. "Oh, Aunt Ashley, what are you doing here? So late, did something happen?" Ashley replied, embarrassed. "I'm in trouble. I had a fight with my husband and left home. I have nowhere to go. I'm going to sleep at the train station. Maybe your grandmother will let you stay for a couple of nights? I'll pay whatever you say." "Alas, what's the matter with you?" The boy splashed his hands. "Of course, stay with us, grandmother. She will gladly accept. Good people are always welcome. Come in, we'll warm your tea." He fussed, running around the apartment, and at the noise his grandmother looked out of the room. When she saw Ashley, she shook her hands. "Jesus, Ashley, what the hell happened to you last night?" Ashley sobbed and told her of her trouble. Granny shook her head, clucked, and clasped her hands to her chest. "Oh, I'm not a city. What kind of men are they nowadays? No shame, no conscience. You, my dear, don't kill yourself. Stay with us as long as you need. There's not much room, but at first we can accommodate you on a cot, and then we'll see." "Thank you, Barbara Adamson." Ashley smiled through her tears. "Only I'm not just for nothing. I'm going to pay. I've got the money. It'll be enough for the first time." What are you? The landlady waved her hands. "No money at all. It's not like we're going to be strangers, Grandma Barb." Ashley started to argue, proving that she didn't want to sit on the old woman's neck. Granny suddenly realized, "Listen, honey, you said you'd talk to the landlady about me. Maybe they'll hire me at least part-time. Do you think they'd take an old woman?" Ashley was embarrassed for a moment, but then she said, "Oh, Grandma Barb, I don't know. It's so busy in there now. You can see for yourself, and our bosses, God forbid, will eat you up. They'll never let you work with an angry belly. Maybe you shouldn't come to us after all." "Do I see?" Grandma sighed. "So I see you're trying your best." Grandmother frowned, but upon reflection nodded. That's true. How can I compete with the young? I am an old woman. Who will take care of him if I go to work for a pittance? He's already an orphan. I don't want to be a burden to him. Let him study. Let him go out into the world in peace." Ashley rushed to hug her grandmother. "It's okay. We'll get through this. We'll be each other's backbone." Somehow she sobbed again. Barbara Adamson stroked her head. A heartbroken Ashley cried even more. Now with gratitude. That's what people are like. People in need but willing to give their shirt off their back. No, what some people. In the meantime, Vidite Postered had brought blankets and pillows into the hall. He laid down next to me on an old mattress to dry off. "Ashley, don't be shy. If you need anything, tell me." She stroked his head, barely holding back the incoming tears. It was a shame she'd spent so many years thinking she had no one in the world but her husband. But how many kind people around and ready to help, to support in a difficult moment. A little while later, Anne fell into a troubled sleep. She dreamed something cloudy, heavy, as if someone dragged her into a dark pool, pulling her to the bottom, and there was no way to get out. And from somewhere she heard a familiar voice, "Ashley, what were you thinking? What about me?" But Ashley just waved it off, swam on and on. That's it, that's enough. She's going to listen to more scoundrels. Her life was in her hands now, and there was no way she was going to let anyone lead her astray again. She continued to work in the cafe, trying not to think about the recent upheaval. Her husband, on the other hand, was tearing up. He obviously did not expect his wife to pull such a trick and run away from home. A divorce was definitely not in his plans. The reason was simple: Jason had an important negotiation looming, where he had to appear with his wife. And the catch was that the partners had known Ashley by sight for a long time. Jason couldn't take his mistress with him. It would immediately raise more unnecessary questions and ruin the whole deal. Finally, Jason took the desperate step of going to Ashley's office and begging for help. "Ashley, help me out," he smiled ingratiatingly, trying to catch her eye. "Well, come negotiate with me once and I won't touch you again, I swear." And the divorce was finalized without a problem. Well, if that's the way you want it. At first, she flatly refused. She'd had enough of this circus. She'd been humiliated and would never again go along with a cheating liar. "I don't want to," she said. "You've made a mess of it. You're the one who has to clean it up. I'm not playing that game anymore." But Jason wasn't going to give up so easily. He called the cafeteria manager aside and whispered fervently to him, nodding to his wife every now and then. She heard bits and pieces of phrases ... "thank you" in a royal way. Give her a fun life so she doesn't have to do any more. The administrator was a good guy. He knew it was a good money deal. He nodded enthusiastically. "Well, Ashley's in trouble now. She's going to have some serious problems at work." And sure enough, the very next day the receptionist called her on the carpet, and from the get-go, he said, "What's the matter, sweetheart?" "At your mercy." The client left the restaurant, not finished and not paid. He says they brought a bad dish. The waitress apparently spit on the way out and had to pay a fine for spoiled food and moral damages. Ashley was speechless at that statement. "What are you talking about? What customer? What damages? I didn't spit. I did everything as usual." But how could she prove it? The receptionist had all the cards in his hand. He threatened to take it out of her paycheck if she persisted. Gave Ashley a hefty fine. "Just hang in there. You can see why he's doing what he's doing, why he's doing what he's told. But if you try to resent him, you'll be out of a job." There was no end to the abuse in the days that followed. She gave the wrong napkins. She didn't smile enough, and the receptionist did what he wanted, feeling Jason's support behind him. And the goal was the same: to force Ashley to give in and agree to the unfortunate negotiations. And to top it all off, Anne felt sick, dizzy and sick to her stomach. Ashley couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Suddenly she remembered how in the morning she had grabbed a salad on the run. Although Ashley usually avoided eating at cafes, low prestige dishes of poor quality could be caught, and they didn't care much about cleanliness in the kitchen, but not to the point of whimsy, when you go all the way just to serve the customers with a smile. Is it poisoned? Ashley thought anxiously, listening to the unpleasant sensations. But what a nuisance. She had a lot on her plate, and now her health was acting up. Ashley continued to move between the tables, trying to fight the discomfort. But she didn't think she could hold on much longer. She was going to collapse unconscious in the middle of the room. Something had to be done, something to get out of this ridiculous situation. Finally, exhausted and desperate, Ashley gave up. "After all, why am I going to go through with this stupid negotiation?" she said. "I'll smile once for the record, but then I'll be free of my debts and my hated marriage. It's worth it." "God be with you." She exhaled tiredly, bumping into Jason at the door. "I'll go once, but it'll be the first and last time. Don't involve me in any more of your scams." Her ex-husband grinned triumphantly and nodded readily. Sure, he said. "Everything will be fine. I promise. You'll put on your best dresses, you'll shine, you'll be charming, and then we'll sign a contract and we'll get a divorce. Good for everyone." Ashley sighed, but didn't object. After all, there was nothing to lose. It couldn't get any worse. That evening, she and Jason went to a business dinner at a fancy restaurant in the center of town. Ashley was curious about it. She'd never been to a restaurant like that before. "I wonder what it's like for the rich," she thought. "It must be all manners and curtsy, not unlike our diner." As soon as they stepped inside, Ashley felt her head spinning again. Nausea was coming up her throat, and her eyes were dark. I should have stayed home for a day instead of going out tonight, she thought. Ashley, what's wrong? Jason asked her worriedly, noticing her pale face. Are you sick or something? No, I'm fine, she said weakly. It'll pass. You go on back to the table and meet your bumps. Jason gave her an incredulous look, but didn't argue. He didn't want to lose his authority in front of his business partners. He escorted his wife to the lavishly laid table and introduced her to the crowd. Ashley put a social smile on her face, trying not to show how badly she felt. She had to hold it together for a little while longer, and then it would be up to her. But suddenly it struck her that Jason hadn't said a word about what the negotiations were about. She'd been wondering if her husband was in business, making important deals. But what if there was something fishy going on? What if he was dragging her into some kind of scam, and then he'd go into the bushes? The thought made Ashley break out in a cold sweat. Or was it just the malaise? Try to figure it out now. Meanwhile, the evening was gaining momentum. The guests were talking animatedly, champagne glasses were clinking, and there were bursts of laughter. Ashley felt completely shattered. Her head was pounding and her throat felt nauseous. I think I should run to the ladies' room, she thought. Ashley rose carefully from the table. She whispered to Jason that she'd be gone for a while. His eyes flashed with annoyance, but he didn't object. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. Ashley made her way to the bathroom and leaned against the wall. What the hell is wrong with this? She thought. I can't get any peace in here. I'm dizzy and my ears are ringing. I must have poisoned myself. But what kind of fool would take expired food? William Michael, who else? Anyway, it wasn't about that right now. The main thing was to get through the night. And then we'll see. Let's not embarrass ourselves in front of the guests. Ashley made an effort to wash her face with cold water and headed back. No way, she thought. I'm not going to give Jason that pleasure. I'm going to smile through my tears, but I'm not going to let him win. One step, another. Damn heels. Who the hell invented heels? I should have worn sneakers and ignored the etiquette. Ashley entered the ballroom. Suddenly, Paul swayed and sprinted toward her. Before she could even realize it, her eyes went black and her knees buckled. The last thing she saw was the twisted face of her husband. And then the world turned upside down and went out. That was the end of the party. And the negotiation was over too, and maybe the rest of my life. The thought flashed through Ashley's fading mind a moment before she was swallowed by the blissful, salvific darkness. There, in the darkness, there was no pain, no bitterness, no disappointment. There, no one lied to her, no one betrayed her, no one forced her to dance to someone else's tune. There she was free at last. And even in her half-sleep, that darkness glimmered. Ashley clutched the scrap of paper with her grandmother and Aiden's address in her hand, a thread to hold on to, a thin ray of hope to keep her from giving up. Ashley fainted as panic swept through the room. Guests were jumping up and down from the table, talking loudly, speculating. Someone was already reaching for the phone to call an ambulance. Jason rushed around his wife, slapping her cheeks or clutching her head. So much for the deal. The whole thing had gone down the drain because of that fool. It had to fall apart in such a bad way, he lamented. Meanwhile, one of Red's companions, a man of about 45, took matters into his own hands. He unceremoniously pushed Jason away and leaned over Ashley, feeling for a pulse. Okay, she's got a pulse, but it's weak. We need an ambulance, he gestured to the waiter and gave him clear instructions. Call. Kid, tell him she's unconscious. We'll let them in here like a fire. The waiter nodded and rushed to the phone. The businessman turned to Jason, giving him a hard look. What kind of show is this, if you don't mind me asking? Why did you bring us here? I don't know what got into her, Jason excused himself. She'd been fine this morning. Maybe she was nervous. It was a delicate matter, a delicate matter. Yes, William Michael flared angrily. Why did you come to negotiate with a woman at all? This is not the way we agreed. This isn't a picnic with jokes, this is a serious deal. Jason shrank under the humiliating stare, not knowing what to say. Obviously, he'd been hoping to make a show of it. Make himself look good. Look at my wife, a real smart and beautiful woman. And she fainted in front of the whole company. While the two men were arguing, The paramedics rushed in. They took a quick look at Ashley and loaded her onto a gurney and wheeled her away. Jason stood there, staring helplessly at them. What now? The contract was off, his wife was in the hospital, and his companions were watching him like wolves. Shame on the whole town. William Michael squeamishly brushed off, as if flicking a speck of dust off his jacket. Red with indignation, he turned to Jason. "All right, sir, you've set me up big time. I'm not used to being made a laughingstock, so you can kiss your contract goodbye. We won't stand for that." Not this. Jason felt the ground slipping from under his feet. He'd made so many plans, so many hopes for this deal. How was he supposed to get out of it? Who should he fall at his feet to forgive? But the companion was inexorable. Angrily flashing his eyes, he turned abruptly and left the restaurant accompanied by the other businessmen. Their impenetrable faces showed that there was no turning back. Jason had screwed up too badly. Left all alone, he slumped in his chair and covered his face with his hands. What was this obsession? How could he have fallen for Ashley like that? He knew how important this meeting was to him. But he'd get even with her. She's the reason he's in the mess he's in now. He's lost his deal and his credibility. Meanwhile, Ashley was in the hospital room. Her head was pounding and her mouth tasted foul. Her whole body was broken, as if from a long illness. She struggled to get up on her elbows and looked around. Where was she? The last thing that came to mind was that she was in a restaurant. Some people, negotiations, and then failure. At that moment, a doctor entered the room, an elderly, tired-looking man in glasses and a white coat. He glanced at some papers on a clipboard, then looked at Ashley carefully over his glasses. "You awake? Welcome back, so to speak. Fainting in the middle of a banquet is serious," he said. Ashley replied with an embarrassed frown. "I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I guess I was nervous. It's never happened to me before. I embarrassed my husband and scared people." "But don't worry so much," the doctor smiled encouragingly. "Anything can happen. You are now the main thing to think about yourself. And about the baby, of course." "Who?" Ashley was stunned. "About what, doctor?" The doctor squinted and paused for a moment. "What? Your future child? Didn't you know? You're pregnant. 6 weeks, already started toxicosis, so you fell down. But don't be upset, it's normal. The important thing is to take care of each other." Ashley froze, staring at the doctor with widened eyes. Pregnancy? That was the last thing she needed. And it was Jason's, but no one else. What do I do now? I mean, he's not going to want to hear about any baby. That's what he's like. All he does is worry about his own business and change mistresses like a glove. What's he want with children now? They're not aristocrats. Husbands, no support. Noticing the patient's confusion, the doctor patted her hand reassuringly. "You do not worry. While you rest, gain strength. Thinking about bad things is bad for you and the baby. You will be discharged in a couple of days, and then we will discuss a plan of action. Maybe we'll get your husband involved. After all, the baby's father should take care of you." Ashley nodded weakly, unable to say a word. If the doctor only knew how much Jason needed that care like a fish needed an umbrella. He'd kill himself before he'd admit he was a father. He'd probably run off to his mistress by now, the parasite. As if to confirm her thought, the door of the room opened. Her husband stood there, red with anger, his eyes blazing. Ashley squirmed, waiting for the storm. "You've ruined everything, you bitch," he yelled from the doorway. "You made me lose my pants. Do you realize what this contract cost me? You blew my best contract." "I'm sorry, I really didn't mean it," Ashley mumbled. "You set this whole thing up on purpose to screw me over. But wait till I get my hands on you." The shocked doctor intervened. "May I ask how you talk to your wife? She shouldn't be nervous. She's pregnant. You'd better be happy. You're about to become a father." Jason choked with indignation. "What father? What are you talking about? I can't have any children with that thing." He glared at his wife, who was huddled in the pillows. "We get rid of it fast. You got it? Are you going to get an abortion? Like it or not, I'm going free. I'm going to live with Alexa. What do you want?" "How can you do that?" Ashley cried through her tears. "It's our baby." "I won't let you do it," he hissed ominously. "Either you do as I say, or you're on your own, no money, no place to live, no nothing. And don't come home. Don't ask, I'll throw you out on the street and I won't look that you're pregnant. That's it," I said. With those words, he headed resolutely for the door. Ashley stared at him in despair, unable to say a word. Was this really the end? Would she be left alone, destitute, homeless, without a roof over her head? And where would she raise her child? And how? The doctor sympathetically shook his head and paternally put his arm around her shoulders. "Do not cry. We'll think of something. After all, you're not the first, you're not the last." But Ashley wasn't listening. Tears were silently streaming down her cheeks, and her lips were trembling. If only she'd known where her marriage would lead. What to do with all this now? She had to spend almost 2 weeks in the hospital. Her condition was unstable, then it went away. Then it was back to twisting and seizures. Ashley was transferred to the Department of Pathology of Pregnancy, leaving there under strict supervision. The days dragged on for an agonizingly long time, and there was no one to visit her. Her husband was gone. There were no relatives left in the city. But one day, an unexpected visitor appeared in the ward. Aiden. Shyly slipping through the door, the boy smiled shyly. "Hello, Aunt Ashley. I've come to check on you. How are you feeling?" She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Aiden, how did you find me? And shouldn't you be at school right now instead of running around hospitals?" Aiden frowned in embarrassment. "My grandmother and I were worried. We thought, what if something happened? So we started calling hospitals." He handed Ashley a bag of goodies. "Here's some cookies, homemade candy. Grandma gave them to him. She said to eat them for your health." Ashley smiled through her tears. Another visitor entered the room, Jason's companion, William Michael. Ashley was embarrassed, not knowing how to react. Was he here to tell her off for the deal she'd blown? But the businessman smiled, looking at her warmly. "Ashley, good afternoon. Are you feeling better? I'm sorry to drop by you unannounced. I didn't want to worry you too much." "Hello, William Michael," Ashley said, confused. "And you are? Are you here to see me about the contract?" "But I..." "Oh, come on," the businessman said. "What contract now? That's it, the train's gone. You'd better think about your health. Especially in your position," he winked conspiratorially. "I didn't just drop by. I wanted to thank you personally. If you hadn't fainted, I'd be in debt up to my eyeballs. Jason was trying to set me up. He'd have gotten out of it on his own and eaten me alive. And then bam, and it all fell apart. You saved me from bankruptcy." Ashley's eyes widened in disbelief. "I didn't do it on purpose. It just kind of happened on its own. The baby." "Well, thank God it did," William Michael said. "Well, I mean, of course, do not blame yourself. You did the right thing." "Oh my gosh, what am I talking about? Anyway, Jason's an asshole. He's a real asshole. Well, he's going to have a lot of fun in court. For fraud and deception. He's nothing to you now. You're free." Ashley's tears of relief. Wow. She'd thought all businessmen were in it together, one scumbag over another. But no, there are decent ones. At least someone understood her. "Thank you," she said in a trembling voice. "You have no idea how important it is to me. I feel like the last piece of trash. My husband's life ruined, your business almost ruined." "Nonsense." Cut the businessman off. "You are not guilty of anything, and baby, take care. He is definitely not involved in this, and everything will be fine. If necessary, I'll help with the work." He shook Ashley's hand reassuringly and stood up, nodding. "Aiden, let me tell you something," he said with a sly wink. "You're a good boy for coming. Come on, walk me to the exit." He obediently followed William Michael, telling him how he'd searched for Ashley and how he'd found her in the hospital. Left alone, Ashley leaned helplessly back against the pillow. Hundreds of thoughts swarmed in her head. What a turnaround. So it wasn't all bad. There were good people to lean on. Maybe she'll pull through. Start a new life without lies and humiliation. Just as long as the baby's okay. She'll never leave him, the only human being she has. Even if he was not conceived from great love, but still the dearest and most desirable. She'd do anything for him. She'd stay up all night and put up with hunger, just so long as the baby was born healthy. Ashley ran her hand over the polished belly, mentally addressing the future child. Hold on, baby. There are two of us now. We can handle everything. Just don't let me down. A week later, Ashley was discharged with a lot of recommendations and instructions, but she couldn't go to work right away. Doctors categorically forbade in her position to spend the whole day on her feet, and even with her toxemia. Any shaking and running was contraindicated. As the doctor walked her to the door of the hospital, he looked at Ashley sternly over his glasses. Look at me and forget about your cafe. You can't be a waitress yet. You can't risk your health. Find a quieter job, like working on a computer or on the phone. Or better yet, go on maternity leave. By God, you don't want to ruin the baby. Ashley nodded sullenly. Don't you dare object. Toxicosis is not something to be trifled with. Carrying a baby is a lot of work, and it's a lot of responsibility. She returned to the apartment of Kovitidi and his grandmother. But what to do? Money is tight. You can't live with acquaintances forever. You're ashamed of yourself. I should find a quiet job. You could just sit there and do paperwork while the kids are here. I have an idea suddenly struck Ashley over tea one evening. Remember William Michael promised to help? Maybe he has some kind of job opening? As a secretary or a dispatcher? I'm not bad at typing and I can answer the phone. What if he does? Grandma nodded approvingly. The day after she was discharged, Ashley, determined, dialed William Michael's number. He answered almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting for her call. Ashley, he said cheerfully. How are you feeling? Ashley smiled embarrassedly, blushing with pleasure. Wow, how thoughtful of him. And he remembers her situation, doesn't he? Thank you, William Michael. I'm slowly coming around, she sighed. Except I'm having trouble with work. The doctor says I can't go back to the cafe, and I need something to live on. Well, I promised to help, the businessman replied. I have an offer. Here's the thing. My mother is quite old, and she needs a nurse. It's not so much her health that she needs to be monitored, but just to talk to. Poor thing, she's going crazy with loneliness. Would you be willing to give it a try? The pay is decent. The hours are convenient and home-based, just what the doctor ordered. Ashley's heart jumped with joy. Here it is, a chance. And it's going to work out so well, and there'll be money, and I won't have to run around. And it's a good thing to help an old man. Oh, William Michael, I'd love to, she exclaimed. I can't thank you enough. You saved me. Consider yourself hired, rejoiced the businessman. Let me pick you up, take you to my mother, you get acquainted, talk, and at the same time we'll discuss all the nuances. Yes, of course, Ashley exclaimed in disbelief. I'll be there in a jiffy. Just tell me when. Within an hour, a happy and excited Ashley was sitting next to William Michael in his fancy car. Wow, how things are working out. Now it looks like Ashley's not going to lose her baby, and she's not going to starve herself. Meanwhile, the car was pulling up to a rich mansion on the outskirts of town. Ashley's breath was taken away by the luxury. William Michael personally escorted her to the door and helped her take off her coat. Mother, welcome a guest. Our assistant has arrived, and my savior, he shouted into the back of the house. Footsteps came from the living room. A gaunt grandmother appeared on the doorstep with a shawl draped over her shoulders. Ashley took a welcoming step toward her, but suddenly froze in place. Her ears rumbled and her eyes darkened. It can't be. It just can't be. Standing before her was Aiden's grandmother, Barbara Adamson. Ah, gasped Ashley. Oh my God, how is this? William Michael perplexedly shifted his gaze from the frozen mother to the dumbfounded Ashley. But you've met Ashley? Who the hell is Barbara Adamson? Would someone please explain this to me? Granny clutched at her shawl with trembling hands, keeping her eyes fixed on Ashley, who was frozen in amazement. Barbara, my little sister. Is she alive? Ashley looked from mother to son in a stupor. She couldn't make sense of it. William Michael, Aiden's grandmother's nephew, the same one whose twin sister Anna had just met. There was no other explanation for the resemblance. They're twin sisters. Well, wait, let me come to my senses, pleaded the businessman. The mother sits down in the chair. Who's Barbara? Who are you talking about? Barbara, my dear sister," snapped grandmother, wiping her tears. "She and I grew up in an orphanage, and then we were separated, taken to different families. I didn't think I'd ever see her again." William Michael only shook his head in confusion. "I'm confused. Are you Sonia? Not Barbara? It's crazy." "Yes, Sonia, I am Sonia," Granny said hurriedly. Ashley's not thinking straight. Shocked, she looked from one to the other. "So you're saying that Grandma Barbara is your sister, and William Michael is her nephew, and Aiden is his nephew, only a cousin." "Aiden who?" the businessman asked in confusion. "That's the first I've heard." "So Barbara has a grandson?" Grandma Sonia guessed. The businessman slapped his forehead and jumped up to his mother. "See? Of course, it's the little boy who was at his grandmother's hospital." "You, Ashley, are you living here?" Yes, Ashley nodded. "And Mom's not going out alone now." William Michael exclaimed, "And your sister is here. And she has a grandson who's a nice little boy. And I'm his uncle. Wow, what a turnaround." He kissed the dazed mother with feeling, and then Gusty hugged Ashley. "Oh, Ashley, friends, so friends. I guess fate sent you to me for a reason. Now we're going to solve all your problems. It'll be more fun for Mom. And we won't let your Aiden get hurt, Ashley." And I was ready to burst with emotion. But look how things turned out. Not so long ago she was pining for a scoundrel of a husband, hiding, wondering how to raise a child. And now there's a family and a job and a roof over her head. Further merged into one happy whirlpool, ringing hugs, tears of joy. William Michael immediately gave orders to assistants to transport immediately grandmother Barbara to her in the mansion, to allocate rooms, do not deny anything. Already by evening everyone was gathered and happy crying sisters, confused, smiling Aiden and sympathetic William Michael. All they could hear was Sonia Barbara, Aunt Ashley, "So you're going to live here now too." At one point Ashley had a funny thought, how would Jason react to all this? He'd probably choke on his anger at seeing his wife in a place like this, surrounded by people he loved. It would have been a number, but she shook off the unwelcome memory. And the scoundrel. He was nothing to her now. Let them go away with their mermaids. And this life promised to be truly happy. There would be enough space and care for everyone in the big house, the grandmothers, the sisters, the girl, and Ashley herself with the future baby. But the main thing was that there would be real relatives around, those who would not betray, but would support her in word and deed. And even though they don't know each other very well yet, it's a matter of time. The main thing is that now they have each other. Ashley felt dizzy. She staggered to her feet, leaned on the outstretched hand, and glanced at her savior, William Michael. He was looking at her with genuine tenderness, adoration, even as if he were the eighth wonder of the world. Ashley was embarrassed, blushing, but the next moment she felt herself being pressed gently against a safe, strong shoulder. A determined whisper in her ear, "Ashley, this is what I want to say. You're not just my savior anymore. You're the person I can't imagine my life without. And if you let me, if you think I'm worthy, well, I'd like to be a real support to you, a husband and a father to a child." Ashley listened to these confused confessions, feeling tears running down her cheeks, tears of relief and hope, the tears of a woman who had rediscovered her faith and love. Was it really true? Was it not a dream? That old life was behind her. And Jason was destined for the fate of all liars and traitors. When he lost his wife, he lost his last chance for redemption and traded it for cheap pleasure, for the ghostly excitement of gambling. Well, it's his own fault. It was too late to bite his elbows now. Ashley allowed herself to be drawn into the circle of rejoicing relatives, where Grandma Barbara Adamson and Grandma Sonja hugged, never tiring of saying, "Cease of my blood," where Aiden galloped with delight, eyes shining. And to where William Michael was opening his arms for a big, happy real family. Seeing a little girl singing at the fountain, the widower hurried to give her some change. And noticing the bracelet on her hand, Adrian slowly walked down the main street of the city. Recently, the office of the company, where the man had been working as an engineer for almost 15 years, had moved to a new building. On the one hand, it was harder to get to work farther from home, plus traffic jams in the mornings and evenings. On the other hand, the building itself was beautiful and bright, and the cityscape around it was pleasing to the eye. Smart people, squares, fountains, picturesque parks, the center of the city, after all. Adrian had recently made it a rule not to rush immediately after the end of the working day to the parking lot, but to walk for a while in the streets. It was a kind of relaxation. Every day here felt like a holiday. Children with balloons and ice cream, horses drawn in carriages. By the time you drove back and forth, there would be no evening traffic, and you could get into the car and go home. Since Stacy had moved in with Adrian, coming home had been much more pleasant. The apartment smelled different now, fresh baked goods, delicious home-cooked food, feminine perfumes and creams. Cozy, cozy, cozy smells. And Stacy herself was cozy, warm, kind. Adrian's heart gradually thawed beside her. He'd been through a lot. Not everyone has to go through what happened to Adrian's family. The man thought he was no longer capable of strong feelings. But Stacy, she was a real revelation to him. It turns out there could be joy in his life. Quiet, so calm, so peaceful, watching TV shows together in the evening, going on picnics with friends, traveling to the sea in the velvet season. And yet the heavy thoughts did not let Adrian go until the end. There was a feeling of understatement, uncertainty. And how could it be otherwise, when it was still unknown what had happened to Amelie? Young parents with young children, especially girls of 4 or 5, still caught Adrian's eye. Right now he was looking at a family walking just ahead of him. A young, slender mom. The father of the family in a brightly colored print t-shirt and jean shorts. 2 children, a boy about 8 years old and a 4-year-old toddler. The boy walked with an impassive, bored look. Perhaps he didn't want to go for a walk with his family. The girl, on the other hand, she looked around with curious eyes and asked questions. The parents, Adrian could clearly see, were a little tired of their youngest daughter's sociability. The mother answered one-word answers. The father, in general, several times irritably asked the child to be quiet. Oh, young people. They do not understand what happiness it is to walk with a little daughter by the hand, to talk to her. Adrian would now gladly answer a million questions of a 4-year-old girl. Not for nothing they say what we have do not keep. But why not keep it? Years ago, Adrian quite consciously enjoyed fatherhood. His daughter Amelie never annoyed him like this young father, nor did she tire him like her mother, who walked with an unhappy face slightly away from him. Perhaps it was because he and Tiana had waited so long for this child. Adrian and Tiana had met at the institute, studying related engineering specialties. They shared many of the same lectures. Adrian immediately noticed the pretty, quiet student with the big blue eyes. It wasn't surprising there weren't many girls in their department. And yet Tiana stood out from the rest. Blonde, wavy hair, wide open eyes, straight features. But Adrian wasn't just attracted by her good looks. Unlike the other girls, Tiana didn't make eyes at guys. She was genuinely interested in the subject, just as Adrian was. And young men who tried to get involved with her were sharply rejected. Adrian took a chance one day. He was paired with Tiana. They were to work on a project together. Well, it was that work that brought them together. They became a very cohesive team, and that's how they became a friendship, which later grew into something more. Tiana and Adrian had a lot in common. They grew up in roughly the same families and were into the same things. Even their plans for life were similar in many ways. Both wanted to first build careers, to achieve something, to find their place, and then to have offspring. The young people got married and rented an apartment. Tiana got a job in a laboratory at the research institute, continued her scientific work. Adrian chose to practice and went to the engineering department at the factory. At first, both received literally pennies. Then the spouses began to grow in their careers. Income increased. Soon they were able to buy their own apartment and make repairs in it. The newlyweds lived soul to soul. Adrian was so easy, so pleasant next to Tiana. She understood him with half a word, and he, accordingly, also understood her. There were no loud arguments and quarrels between them. All matters were settled by negotiation and discussion of facts and opinions. His mother often told Adrian that no girl would get along with him, so pedantic and correct. She was wrong. Tiana was as rational and conscientious as he was. It turned out that they had found each other. Adrian was happy. Everything in his life was working out even better than he had ever dreamed. The couple tried to take vacation days. Together they liked to travel around Russia. They went to Altai and Karelia and climbed mountains and admired Baikal. It was so great to get acquainted with all this splendor together with the same enthusiastic and delighted wife. 7 years had passed since the wedding. When Adrian and Tiana started talking about children, the material base for future heirs was prepared. Grandmothers on both sides have long been waiting for grandchildren and vowed to look after the kids. And with great pleasure. Accordingly, Tiana would not have to sacrifice her career at the research institute. And the couple themselves already wanted children. Adrian imagined how he would introduce his son or daughter to the world, tell this little man about everything. And Tiana would make a wonderful mother. She is so attentive, so sensitive, so wise. The couple consciously decided to approach the issue of childbearing. First, they were fully examined to reduce the chances of an unhealthy baby. That's when it became clear that Tiana had female problems. Very serious ones. Pregnancy is practically impossible, said the verdict of the doctor Professor Ivanov, to whom Tiana with such difficulty managed to make an appointment. What, no chance at all, Adrian clarified. He had accompanied his spouse to the clinic that day. But it is possible to try different treatment options, the doctor replied evasively. Only all these methods are expensive and time-consuming, and I can't guarantee the result. Congenital anomalies of development. It happens, unfortunately. This was a blow to the couple. Until now, they had everything worked out, everything went according to plan. And then all of a sudden this happened. And even after the professor's disappointing verdict. Both Adrian and Tiana suddenly realized how much they wanted to be parents. And so began a period of treatment. Wandering around doctors, taking endless tests, Tiana's periodic hospitalizations. All this took a lot of money and time and, most importantly, moral strength. It was very hard at first to hope, to fulfill all doctors' prescriptions, and then to be disappointed time after time. Always calm, rational Tiana now often cried when she thought that her husband did not see. But he noticed everything: her red eyes and puffy eyelids. And worst of all, the desperate look of pain in her eyes. It was hard for Adrian to see his wife like that. His main desire now was not a child, but the peace and happiness of the woman he loved. But how to help Tiana? Adrian did not know the answer to this question. The man, as he could, supported his wife, sought for her consultations in the best reproductive centers in the country, went with her to painful procedures, calmed her down. Maybe we should give up this idea, he sometimes suggested. The race to have a baby has already taken on a kind of unhealthy character. I feel like stopping it. Let's develop our careers. That's important too, isn't it? Once upon a time, work, academia, that was the main thing in Tiana's life. The woman's eyes lit up when she talked about a new development or experimental project. Work inspired Tiana, gave her strength and energy, and she was good at what she did, very good. She was respected, she was invited to consultations, she was approached with difficult questions. Adrian was happy for his wife and proud of her. He understood Tiana. The man himself gave a lot of time and effort to the plant and was also considered a first-class specialist, but the spouses acted in slightly different fields. Now Tiana had changed a lot. She no longer took on interesting projects, served in the laboratory from call to call, and hurried home. The once prominent scientist now preferred simple chores and had completely abandoned her research. This truly frightened Adrian. He understood, of course, that the female body is organized differently than the male. The female sex is more susceptible to the influence of hormones. The maternal instinct is a great power and all that. But still, the changes that were happening to Tiana were alarming. She had become lethargic, irritable, even somewhat cranky. This once pleasant woman was fixated on this most inaccessible motherhood, made the child as an idea fix, and nothing else interested her, nothing else pleased and fascinated her. She even stopped communicating with her friends and colleagues. Tiana devoted all her free time to studying information about her diagnosis. Several long years passed. During this period, Tiana calmed down and returned to work for a while. But the dream of becoming a mother did not let her go until the end, and sooner or later everything resumed: trips to doctors, tests, research. Medicine does not stand still. New reproductive technologies appear. Old ones are being improved. You have to try, was how Tiana explained her behavior to her husband. Adrian missed the old Tiana, smart, purposeful, understanding. Sometimes she came back for a while, and it was a real happiness. They talked about different topics again, watched movies together, planned trips. Why don't we take the baby out of the orphanage? With this proposal, Adrian addressed his wife more than once. He thought that a child, even if it was not his own, would make Tiana happy, help her finally feel like a mother. But she, Tiana, needed only her child, and she went to her goal, not noticing nothing and no one around. After about 15 years of marriage, the long-awaited pregnancy finally happened. Another experimental treatment helped. Adrian and Tiana were almost 40 years old at the time. The man did not expect such a result. The news came as a surprise to him and even frightened him a little, knocked him out of his rut. So many years to live with his wife, only the two of them. And here. But Tiana was happy without any reservations. Despite the wild nausea, because of which the woman could not eat at all in the first months, despite the constant pain in the abdomen and lower back, despite the dizziness, Tiana tolerated pregnancy badly. She almost never left the hospital, constantly lying under some drips, drank handfuls of medicines, endured painful injections. Several times there was a threat of miscarriage. Adrian could not imagine what would have happened to Tiana if. But the doctors managed to keep the complicated pregnancy going, because Tiana was under special supervision. To be honest, Adrian had no warm feelings for the future child. He saw it as a problem, as an obstacle that prevented his wife from living a normal, full life. And then Amelie was born, and Adrian was the first to hold that tiny, wrinkled red creature in his arms. Tiana insisted that her husband attend the birth with her. "It's such an event long awaited and huge," she said. "So many problems and trials are behind us. And here it is, the prize. Besides, the doctors say that we will definitely not have more children. So." Adrian didn't want to be in the delivery room, and he was intimidated by the process. And he had no reverence for the whole thing, but he had to. At the moment when Adrian first looked at the face of his newborn daughter, the man suddenly felt that the world for him turned upside down, became completely different. The baby screamed loudly, making everyone aware of the expressive changes that had happened to her. And the man realized that his girl was cold, terribly hurt. He felt it in his gut. Adrian pressed his daughter to him, gently rocked her in his arms. The girl sobbed, looked at him a couple more times and calmed down. She felt safe around her father. Adrian realized that the daughter is now the closest, dearest person to him, that he, for her sake, he would roll mountains and get the moon from the sky. Then the child was given to her mother. The girl had to be fed, and Adrian was asked to leave the room. "I'll see you at the discharge," the midwife smiled. Now the mother and the baby needed some time alone. Adrian and Tiana were wonderful parents. They could spend hours just admiring their little Amelie. They were fascinated by everything about her. And how she tried to reach for a toy, and how she jumped with her hands and feet, and how the first smile appeared, the first tooth, the first tentative steps. It was all becoming a huge event for the new parents. Adrian had to leave for work every morning. Tiana stayed with Amelie. She completely dissolved in motherhood. The woman had waited so long for this. Tiana practiced a lot with Amelie, gave her massages, cooked delicious baby food for her, and took her for walks. With her usual zeal, Tiana studied the literature on the development of young children and practiced her new knowledge on her own child. In many ways, Amelie learned new skills faster than her peers. She spoke early. She learned to draw, sculpt, and button early. Adrian and Tiana couldn't get enough of their daughter. She was such a clever girl, such a beauty. Outwardly, Amelie resembled Adrian's grandmother: thick, dark hair, huge brown eyes, dark skin. "Nothing of me, the blonde-haired, fair-skinned," Tiana marveled. "Nothing surprising," Adrian joked. "They say dark genes are stronger. That's fine. But what a bright girl she's growing up to be. Black eyebrows, long, dark eyelashes. She won't even have to wear makeup. She'll save on cosmetics." Amelie grew up an affectionate, obedient girl and very inquisitive. The child inherited a passion for exploring the world from both parents. Tiana was very worried about this peculiarity of her daughter. Amelie climbed everywhere. She was interested in what is on the top shelves of the closet, how the alarm clock is organized, how deep the puddles. She climbed trees to get a better look at fruits or flowers, and sat above open hatches, peering intently into the darkness. "He'll fall off someday and hurt himself," Tiana complained. "I'll keep an eye on that little brat." "Yes," Adrian agreed. "She's a quick little girl." The man was proud that his daughter was so inquisitive. Tiana was too. But she was tired of watching the active child around the clock. Only here on the fate of the woman did not complain. All the troubles associated with her daughter gave her great pleasure. Sometimes it seemed to Adrian that his wife was overprotective of their only child. It would be easier to treat some things, to give the girl more independence, which she so aspired to. But in the upbringing of Amélie, he tried not to interfere. First, the spouses who have read a mountain of literature about children are more discerning. Secondly, Tiana had dreamed of motherhood for so long, and she was already a mother at a mature age. In their situation, it was easy to turn a blind eye to some things. Amélie adored her parents. She always looked forward to when her father came home from work, to climb on his lap and ask him a million questions, and to play the fun and noisy games that Tiana was incapable of: pillow fights, catch up, hide and seek. Adrian liked to take his daughter for a walk in the park after work. Sometimes Tiana would go with them, but more often she stayed home to clean up in peace and quiet, cook a delicious dinner, a break from the noisy child, after all. At first, father and daughter strolled along the alleys and talked about serious topics, speculated about where flies and fairy bugs wintered, and about the life of the mysterious inhabitants of the pond. They discussed the cartoons Amélie had watched during the day. Adrian smiled as he looked at his daughter, who was so serious and sensible. He thought that she must have a great future ahead of her. Then Adrian took his daughter to the playground and the fun began. Amélie rolled down the slide, climbed the stairs. She didn't do that in front of her mother. She was too worried about her long-awaited treasure. And Amélie also had to get acquainted with the kids right away. The children loved the cheerful and sociable girl. Adrian was pleased that his child so easily finds a common language with peers. The attentive father was sure that his daughter would like it in kindergarten. But Tiana resisted the idea. "I quit my job on purpose to take care of the girl myself. I didn't give birth to her to dump her on the state. No, I intend to enjoy motherhood to the fullest. So what? Kindergarten is just daycare for the children of working parents. I'm doing a lot with our girl. I'm developing her. No, let her be with me. It's better that way." Adrian didn't argue, but every once in a while he'd bring up daycare again. There are children there, songs, dances. Tiana prepared her daughter for a career in science, thought that she must follow in her footsteps. And the girl seemed to be doing well. Amélie grasped everything on the fly. Her brain was working, of course, as it should. But Adrian noticed other talents in his daughter. Amélie had an amazing voice, clear, high. When the little girl sang songs from cartoons, Adrian involuntarily froze. He himself once long ago attended music school. He had not achieved any particular success in this field, but the knowledge he had gained was enough to realize that Amélie had a wonderful ear. She reproduced the melodies very accurately. It was a miracle. Another little miracle from Amélie. Maybe we should take her to a music teacher for an audition. Amélie is clearly a talent, Adrian suggested to his wife. She's still a little girl, Tiana said. In music school from the age of 6 or 7 years old. And our daughter does not need it. She will be a major scientist. You'll see. After the baby was born, Tiana felt happy, but she was never the same. She was very anxious, too focused on the baby. Still, it was better than the state she was in when she was trying to get pregnant. Adrian still loved her, loved Tiana, even perhaps more than he had when they were young. They had become very close. They're having a wonderful baby. It's such a blessing. Adrian tried not to pay attention to little things like Tiana's focus on the baby and her excessive anxiety about her daughter. He understood why his wife behaved like that. The man himself often spoiled his daughter. Coming home from work, he bought her gifts just for fun, without reason: sweets, dolls, stuffed animals. It was a joy to see Tiana and Amélie light up with joy at the sight of the surprise her father took out of the bag. And even more so when the little girl hugged him with her little arms and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy." Adrian's heart melted with tenderness. He had never imagined it was possible to have such strong feelings for someone. Tiana always tried to make her daughter's birthdays bright and beautiful. She prepared for a grand celebration in advance. She thought up the theme, chose gifts, bought or prepared her own decorations. The second birthday of her daughter was held in the style of Disney princesses. The little girl then adored these cartoons. The third birthday was a ball in the palace of the Underwater King, as Amélie at that age was carried away by a fairy tale about mermaids. The fourth birthday of the girl was held in the land of unicorns. Yes, Tiana managed the almost impossible. In just an hour, she turned the apartment into a magical place, a haven for these fantastic animals. Amelie then adored unicorns, watched cartoons about them, drew them, molded fabulous characters from plasticine. "I wish I could ride one," she said dreamily. Tiana just smiled and waved her hands. "Daughter, you understand, a unicorn. They live so far away they don't come to our place." "I understand, and it's a pity." Ami sighed. Adrian decided to fulfill his daughter's birthday dream, by all means. Adrian went to the racetrack and talked to the pony trainers. He had a wonderful idea and tried to make it a reality. One of the girl instructors was enthusiastic about Adrian's plan. Together they came up with masquerade costumes for a beautiful white pony, which was to represent a unicorn, a twisted plastic mane, Velcro, pink ribbons for the mane and tail, aqua makeup, which was planned to draw hearts on the sides of the animal, a wreath of artificial flowers. All this was to turn a small horse into a fairy tale character. Adrian anticipated in advance how excited his little girl would be. This pleasure, of course, cost a lot of money. But wouldn't you do anything for your favorite little princess? When the main surprise was ready, Adrian thought about the gift. It had to be something themed and very beautiful. The man ordered a plush unicorn through acquaintances from abroad. At that time, there was no such abundance of different toys in children's stores. To get the original character was almost impossible. But the loving father did not stop there. Because the daughter is already 4 years old, she already knows a lot, understands a lot. It is time to give her something beautiful and elegant, purely feminine. Let her get used to it from a young age, Adrian decided. And he ordered in the jewelry workshop a wonderful set of silver bracelet and earrings, made in the form of tiny unicorns, covered with pink enamel. The man had been looking for a master ready to take on such an order for a very long time. The work was difficult. Professionals simply did not want to get involved. In the end, one elderly jeweler decided to do it. He worked for a long time, all the time remodeling and improving something. But in the end, the result was so beautiful that Adrian could not help but sigh in admiration when he saw the set for the first time. Tiana was delighted too. "My God, what a miracle it is." The woman shook her head. "I've never seen anything like it. You are so good." "There is nothing else like it in the world," Adrian assured her, enjoying his wife's reaction. "It's exclusive to Amelie. Look, it has her name engraved in calligraphy on the back of the bracelet. It's so beautiful and sophisticated. A gift for a real lady." Amelie's 4th birthday went just fine. It was perfect. The girl woke up in an apartment decorated with balloons, bright pictures, and cardboard decorations from the unicorn world. Next to her crib was a chair littered with gifts from her parents. There were toys, dressy dresses, and brightly colored books. But more than other gifts, the girl was impressed by the jewelry with unicorns. She asked to put the bracelet on her arm, and has not taken it off since. Adrian looked at his happy daughter and smiled. Then all 3 of them prepared for the guests. They prepared salads, baked a delicious cake, and then decorated it with figures made of mastic. Amelie worked very hard. In the evening, the guests came, and the apartment immediately became noisy and cheerful. Grandparents, Tiana and Adriana's acquaintances with children of Amelie's age. The birthday girl was showered with gifts and compliments. But she was not only accepting congratulations, the girl herself wanted to surprise the guests. Amelie in her princess dress stood on a chair and sang for everyone a song from her favorite cartoon about a unicorn. Adrian listened to the pure, ringing voice of his girl, and his heart shrank with tenderness and joy. Wow! What a miracle fate had bestowed upon him and Tiana. A beautiful, talented daughter, thought the man at that moment for the umpteenth time that he would do everything for Amelie's happiness. Guests applauded loudly, several times called the singer for an encore. Amelie did not refuse. She liked to be the center of attention, liked to sing, liked to receive compliments. Bold, daring, artistic. Adrian decided then that, despite his wife's plans, their girl would still shine on stage. Tiana will understand, he said to himself. And then it was time for the big surprise. Children and adults poured out into the street, huddled on the front porch. A real unicorn was coming toward them from the archway. Amélie jumped with delight. The other children immediately followed suit. Next to the unicorn was a young fairy. The girl instructor tried to let her blonde curls loose on her shoulders and wore a light, long sundress with flowers. Can I go to him?" Amélie asked the fairy, not believing her happiness. She almost cried with delight. Her biggest dream had come true. "Of course you can. He'll be happy to take you for a ride," answered the fairy. Amélie made 2 honorable circles around the yard, then jumped down from the unicorn, stroked his face and asked, "Can he ride my guests too?" "Of course he's here to make your party perfect." The little guests took turns to sit on the unicorn's back and rode around the yard with joyful, shining faces. Amélie's party was unforgettable for them as well. Adrien looked at his girl and thought that she was not only smart and beautiful, but also very kind and sensitive. She took care of others. At the age of 4, she asked the fairy to give her little guests a ride on a unicorn. What 4-year-old could have thought of that? It was a wonderful day. From it all, those involved left a lot of bright impressions and no less bright photos. On one photo, Amélie was captured in the arms of a new plush unicorn. A silver bracelet glistened on her wrist. A thin tiara crowned her head. The girl smiled broadly into the lens. She was truly happy at this moment. It was this picture that Tiana handed over to the investigators just 3 months later. It happened on a warm and sunny September evening. It was Indian summer, the most wonderful season of autumn golden trees, illuminated by the gentle sun, leaves rustling underfoot. That evening, Tiana and Amélie decided not to stay at home and took advantage of the wonderful weather to take a walk in the park. The more so because of the City Day festivities. My wife called Adrien too. It would be great to walk through the park as a family, the 3 of us. But the man refused. He had a lot of work he had taken home from the factory. They had a serious inspection on the way from New York, some reports that needed to be finished urgently. "No, unfortunately, I will not be able to accompany my 2 beautiful ladies." Adrien shook his head, "although I would like it very much." Amélie pouted. She was charming in her light red dress and red beret, flirtatiously pushed to the side. 2 tight pigtails decorated with pink silk ribbons rested on her shoulders. On her feet were new patent shoes, not quite modern. The image was original and charming. Tiana tried to dress the girl like a doll, looking for stylish and unusual things for her. Amélie almost always stood out among the other children. "Okay, fine, but I have to work." Adrien waved his hands. "But don't worry. This weekend I'll go with you to the ponds. I promise." The ponds. Amélie was so excited. "That's great. We'll ride the Ferris wheel and feed the ducks buns. Yes?" "Yes," Adrien smiled. "And then we'll go to the cafe. Do you have your favorite berry pancakes? Okay?" "All right. Now you 2 have fun alone without me. Then tell me everything before you go to bed and listen to your mom. Okay?" "I will." Amélie reached out to hug her father. The sleeves of her red coat pulled up, exposing her wrist, on one of which the silver bracelet with unicorns glittered. The girl never parted with her favorite piece of jewelry. One of the earrings, however, had already gotten lost. The clasp was unreliable. The second, now practically useless, was in a box on Amélie's desk. "Okay, we're off." Tiana smiled at her husband. Adrien hugged his wife, kissed his daughter, walked them to the elevator, waved at the closing doorway. This picture still stood in front of his eyes, dressed up happy Amélie, smiling at her father. Adrien had not realized then that he would never see his little girl again. He didn't even have a hint of foreboding. Adrien went back to the apartment, sat down at the computer, plunged into the numbers. Needed to take advantage of a moment of peace and quiet at home. Amélie would be back in a couple or 3 hours. And of course she would want to share her impressions with her father, to tell him about the walk. And then he would have to put aside all his work and listen attentively to his daughter. Adrien knew that this is very important for children, such contact with parents. But the man heard the sound of the key turning in the lock after about an hour. It was too early. Tiana came flying into the living room. When Adrien looked at her, he knew something terrible had happened. The disheveled black hair, the unnatural pallor, the trembling, cracked lips. and worst of all, the panic in her eyes. Amelie never came back, she blurted out, looking hopefully at her husband. He shook his head negatively. At that moment, an icy hand clutched his heart. Terrible. But you were with her. What happened? The man mumbled confusedly. Instead of answering, Tiana rushed to the phone and dialed the police number. Only later, much later, did Adrian learn the details of what had happened. First, there was the rushing around the park looking for her daughter, talking to the police, trying to calm Tiana, who did become hysterical. However, before that, she answered all the questions of the police in detail and thoroughly. The search for the little girl, who disappeared in the park, began immediately. Squads of police officers combed the neighborhood, volunteers joined them. The trouble that fell on the two unfortunate parents left no one indifferent. The police had a hard time convincing Tiana and Adrian to stay put in the apartment. The only argument that worked was that the girl could come home on her own. We need someone to be home at that moment. You're not going to help with the search anyway, the young man in the uniform persuaded the worried parents. Unnecessary emotions, aggravation of the situation. People should work calmly, without distractions, you know. Adrian sat on the couch, hugging his wife tightly. Tiana was shivering violently. She blamed herself incessantly, using the harshest of expressions. Adrian felt the urge to blame Tiana for everything at first. She hadn't looked. She hadn't been attentive enough to let the child out of her sight. But seeing the state of his wife, the man held back. Why kill a man who's already in a state of grief? It could have happened to anyone. It was just an accident. It's not Tiana's fault. We had such a nice walk in the alleys, the woman sobbed, sharing her memories. Amelie was fascinated by everything that was happening in the park. Animators, photographers with a monkey, music, smells of cotton candy and popcorn. Master classes for children. The park was crowded that day. Of course, it was City Day. The festivities have always attracted people from all over Chicago to this place. The epicenter of the celebration was the summer stage in the center of the park. It was there that the festive concert with the best children's groups of the state took place. Little artists sang, danced, played musical instruments, and acted out skits from famous works. In between, the hosts held contests among the young audience and generously awarded prizes to the winners. That's where Amelie wanted to go. I didn't want to go there with her, Tiana said. The crowd was too big. She's just a little girl. Why did we have to jostle? Amelie wanted to see the concert so badly. She begged me, pleaded with me, even tried to bribe me. She was just going for it, as always. Adrian nodded. He understood perfectly well how it was. Amelie herself dreamed of performing on stage someday. Their girl was a born artist. Of course, there was no stopping her. So Tiana and Amelie found themselves in the crowd. The mother thought her daughter would see that there was no way to get to the stage. Maybe she would even be frightened by such a crowd of people. And then it would be easier to distract her, to take her somewhere less crowded. But no way. The little girl persistently moved through the crowd closer to the stage. And then a local rock band came out to play. It was a young band, but the musicians had already made it on big TV. Tiana didn't know that celebrities would be the highlight of the concert. Otherwise, she wouldn't have dragged her daughter into the crowd. She knew what that meant. There was such a crush, the woman sobs. People, they went crazy. I felt like everyone in the park was rushing closer to the stage. I was so scared. I wanted to take Amelie in my arms, but I couldn't. We were separated, and she was lost in the sea of people. Tiana screamed, calling for her daughter, but the music was so loud that the poor woman couldn't even hear herself. And the fans around her were singing at the top of their lungs. The concert ended and the crowd quickly dispersed. Tiana ran around the stage, asking everyone she met if they had seen a girl in a red coat, a little girl with 2 pigtails. People shook their heads in the negative and went about their business. The woman ran along the paths and alleys, inspected the playgrounds, and searched with her eyes for a small bright red spot. Amelie was dressed so brightly she must stand out from the crowd, but the girl was nowhere to be found. Finally, the unhappy woman came across an old guard. The old man listened to her and made a suggestion, which Tiana grasped at like a drowning man grasping at straws. So maybe your little girl has been home for a long time? Lost sight of you and ran home? Does she know the way? She knows the way. Tiana nodded and rushed home. There was hope, almost certainty. Is Amelie home? Of course she's home. Where else would she be? But in the apartment, the woman was met only by a surprised Adrian. The first time the search was active, on the posts and walls of the city appeared orientations on the missing girl. Tiana herself chose the photo for these ads, the one taken at Amelie's birthday party. By the end of the second 24 hours, volunteers and police officers began to talk about the fact that it is now unlikely that the child will be found alive. Usually a happy outcome is possible within the first few hours of a missing person. Adrian and Tiana didn't want to believe that. They searched the internet for stories of children returning home alive and unharmed after weeks and months of being missing. It really does happen, and these are not one-time occurrences. The spouses couldn't eat, sleep, or drink for the first time. They didn't know where their little girl was or what was happening to her. How can you swallow a single bite of food in such a situation? Both of them became gaunt and thin. Tiana blamed herself constantly. Periodically, she would get hysterical. But worst of all were the periods when the woman sat swaying slightly and staring at one point with an absent look. Adrian thought it was her way of disconnecting from reality to reset her nervous system. But it looked very scary. During these difficult days, the man was afraid to leave his wife unattended. A few weeks passed. Adrian went back to work. Things were a bit distracting, forcing him to switch gears. Those scary thoughts were still present in the background. Where's Amelie? What's happening to her now? They loved their little girl so much, cared for her so much. The little girl knew nothing but love and attention and warmth. And those people around her now, how are they treating the little girl? Amelie must be very scared. And of course she misses her mom, her dad, her home. Crying, probably. Adrian's heart was breaking at the thought. Tiana was troubled too. There was no face on her. Her mother and Adrian's mother were always visiting her. They were afraid that she might kill herself. They convinced Tiana that Amelie needed her. What will it be like for the girl without her mother when she comes back? But it was very hard for Tiana. Guilt pressed down on her with an unbearable weight. Not being able to hold her daughter plunged her into a deep sadness. Sometimes the woman could not cope with her emotions. She tore her clothes, threw dishes against the walls, screamed like a wounded animal. Adrian did not stop her or comfort her at such times. 3 months had passed since Amelie had gone missing. It was already winter. Had the search died down? No, not at all. It hadn't stopped, but it wasn't as active. The investigators said it was a long shot, but they'd keep trying. And the couple also learned some scary numbers. It turns out that every year around the world a lot of children disappear, and then they are never found alive or dead. Adrian never even thought about it before. How does this planet have so much grief and misery? This is what kind of world they brought their tender, talented girl into and did not save her. The main version of the investigation was kidnapping, because if the girl had just gotten lost in the city, she would have been found long ago. The same would have happened if Amelie had an accident, hit by a car, fell through a manhole, fell into some pit. But the girl disappeared without a trace. So someone went to a lot of trouble to cover their tracks. Closer to spring, one of the volunteers found Amelie's things, her toy and beret, at the dump. An investigator called the parents to identify the clothes. Tiana immediately said with certainty that it was her daughter's coat and beret. She couldn't be mistaken, for it was Tiana who had bought Amelie the beautiful outfit. What does it mean? Adrian asked hopefully. It's hard to say, shrugged the investigator. Perhaps it is encouraging news. The kidnapper obviously did not intend to harm the girl immediately. He got rid of the clothes because they were too conspicuous to attract attention. That's good, Tiana whispered. Somehow they were sure that Amelie herself would be found soon. No news for so long. And then there was such a clue. Except nothing of the sort happened. The case stalled again. Adrian tried to get his wife to go back to work. He knew she'd be welcomed back with open arms as an ex-employee, even after such a long hiatus. A favorite job would help Tiana get back to life, feel needed, useful. Sitting in 4 walls was draining her of her strength. What are you talking about? Tiana was annoyed. I'll go to work, and at that moment Amelie will come home, and no one will be there. I understand Tiana's situation was very difficult. She stayed at home, leaving the apartment only when her husband came home. Tiana scoured the internet for stories of happy returns of children. She made all sorts of assumptions about the fate of her daughter, Amelie. 13 years had passed. Tiana had completely given up, turned into a pale, wrinkled, devastated old woman. She began to have serious heart problems. She needed to be hospitalized, but she refused. "Look at what you've done to yourself," Adrian said painfully, seeing her condition. She could not accept the loss. Adrian, of course, also felt sad and worried. He realized that the longing for his lost daughter would remain with him forever. But unlike his wife, the man accepted the situation, returned to life, and began to work. And Tiana persistently brought herself to nervous exhaustion and illness, continuing to blame herself. At night, she often woke up from nightmares. She refused to go to the hospital. They were regularly visited by ambulance because of heart attacks. Doctors gave her injections and strongly recommended hospitalization, but Tiana wrote refusal after refusal. Adrian couldn't convince her she wouldn't accept any of his arguments. Sometimes he thought it would have been better if Amelie had not been found alive. Then Tiana would have finally accepted the terrible truth. There would have been some certainty. As it was, the case was barely progressing. True, over the years, the couple had been called to the station several times to identify children who looked like Amelie. The missing girl's profile was all over the country. We've had calls from all over the country. I understand the situation was extremely difficult for both spouses. Concerned citizens called, saying they had seen a girl who looked like Amelie near a store, on a playground near a pond. Adrian and Tiana looked through photos, surveillance footage. Sometimes they'd even been shown homeless girls found at a train station somewhere, but they never saw Amelie. "Take a closer look," the investigator asked. "Maybe she's yours? It's been a long time. The girl has changed, grown up." But the couple only shook their heads. They would not recognize their daughter even grown up. These calls made Tiana's condition worse each time. First desperate hope, then another bitter disappointment. All of this brought up again the years of worry in her soul. She would become hysterical, calling herself names. Adrian cost a great deal of labor to calm his wife. Acquaintances advised Adrian to leave Tiana. "She does not live, and you prevent you from returning to normal life. Have you already accepted the fact that Amelie cannot return? You have a chance to remarry, maybe you'll be a father again." But Adrian couldn't think of such a thing. He still loved Tiana. His wife was the closest person to him. They'd been through so much together. These Strosanos had brought them closer together, united them. The man no longer hoped that Amelie would be found, but he still believed that Tiana would come to her senses, get over her grief, become almost her old self, and they might go traveling again. A change of scenery would do them both good. But it didn't work out. Another heart attack took the life of a not yet old woman right in the arms of a distraught Adrian. The ambulance didn't make it this time. The doctors said it was all going to come to this. Tiana brought herself to this, did not cope with the disaster. So Adrian was alone. He grieved for his wife, regretting her ruined life. The man went over in his memory their life since the disappearance of his daughter, and tried to understand if there was anything else he could do for his wife to get her out of this state. By all accounts, no, Adrian had done everything he could. Still, the worm of doubt kept him in a state of doubt. A few years later, Stacy came into Adrian's life. The man was approaching 60 at the time. He did not think that such a change in his fate was possible. It was one of his colleagues, a divorced woman, who single-handedly raised 2 sons. The boys had gone their separate ways, one studying abroad, the other living and working in a distant seaside town. Stacy, accustomed to taking care of someone, strosala from loneliness and lack of demand. Somehow it happened that Adrian and Stacy became unnoticeably close. The man was easy and calm next to this warm, caring woman. It turns out that it is so wonderful when someone thinks about you and tries to do something nice for you. And Adrian liked to feel patronized and protected again. Soon they were living together in Adrian's apartment. The man had renovated all the rooms long ago, so that nothing reminded him of family life. Because it was too painful to see the curtains, chosen by Tiana, and to look at the children's furniture, specially purchased for Amelie, and to realize that her daughter and beloved wife were gone and would never be around again. Stacy, of course, knew the life story of her chosen one. She supported him, listened attentively to Adrian's outpourings, which made him feel better. She hugged him, stroked his head, didn't ask too many questions. Adrian, in turn, listened with interest to Stacy's stories about her life. The woman had had a hard time too, but in a different way. Her husband had been an alcoholic, and he'd gotten his hands dirty. It was hard to get rid of him. Yes, and alone to pull 2 sons too was not easy. But all these were the usual difficulties of life, which did not break Stacy, but only hardened her. Adrian, however, fate has prepared a much more terrible test. However, the man was able to survive his grief. Of course, thoughts of Amelie still lingered in Adrian's mind. He often wondered if his daughter was still alive, and if so, how she was doing. Amelie was now a grown-up girl, just over 20. A beautiful girl, to be sure. The memory of Amelie could trigger anything. Right now, that trigger was this curious little girl. She bored her parents with her questions. The family was still walking nearby Adrian. The man took one last look at the cute child with a smile and turned the other way. He felt like walking past the fountain. A small crowd had gathered in the square. Adrian didn't understand at first what was the reason for such interest of the passers-by, and then suddenly he heard a clear, ringing, high voice. Someone was singing there at the fountain, hidden from Adrian's eyes by the backs of people. An invisible child was singing a familiar tune from the Unicorn cartoon, Amelie's favorite cartoon. The young singer's voice sounded very much like Adrian's daughter's. The man even had tears in his eyes. The longing for his daughter squeezed the man's heart with renewed strength. But it was nothing. He was used to it by now. Now Adrian, of course, couldn't pass it by. The man made his way through the crowd and froze, amazed at the sight he saw. On the side of the fountain stood a girl about Amelie's age when she had disappeared. She reminded Adrian subtly of his daughter, though she was clearly a little gypsy girl. Brown skin, long dark loose hair, black eyebrows arched, and big brown eyes. She was dressed in a colorful blouse with long sleeves and a floor-length skirt decorated with lush waves. On the girl's neck was a massive necklace, not suitable for such a tiny girl. The gypsy girl diligently played a familiar melody, dancing to the beat. The listeners smiled and generously poured coins and bills into the box at her feet. The girl, seeing how she was being received, tried even harder. She suddenly raised her arms, making another dance pause. On her thin wrists glittered bracelets. Adrian was stunned. He recognized one of the bracelets. And how not to recognize this unique thing, a pink unicorn, an exclusive for his daughter. Of course, to be completely sure, you need to see the jewelry closer. But Adrian was already very clear. The girl finished her song, the adults clapped for her, and began to disperse. Adrian was still standing behind the lamppost. He didn't know what to do. Should he approach the child, ask her where she got the bracelet? But he didn't want to frighten the little gypsy girl. It was better to wait until one of the adults came for her. I'm sure they're around here somewhere. I don't think they'd leave a little girl like that all alone and unattended. And indeed, a couple of minutes later, a teenager of about 12 to 13 years old came up to the girl, swarthy, black-eyed and curly-haired. He smiled at the singer and asked something. She answered. The boy patted her on the head, took her hand. Then he picked up a box of money with his free hand and led the gypsy away from the square. Worried, Adrian followed the children. Really, what to do? Turn to this boy. There was no doubt that he would take the little girl in his arms and rush away. Light and quick on his feet. He's obviously a cautious boy. Too much attention would only scare him off. So Adrian continued to follow the children. Meanwhile, the gypsies passed the main square, walked through the maze of narrow central streets and found themselves on the outskirts of the city. Here were old private houses, and mostly elderly people lived here. Beyond this street was a vacant lot, and beyond it was a bypass road. From afar, Adrian could see that this was the place where the Tabor had settled wagons, people sitting around fires in groups, and a merry murmur. So that was where the children were going. Adrian probably should have followed them, talked to the adults. But how would he be received there? It was a little scary to go, but what could he do? For the first time in so many years, there was a clue about Amelie. Maybe it would lead Adrian to his daughter. What if he finally found out what had happened to his princess? The man followed the children with a determined step. The boy noticed the surveillance. He turned around and looked at Adrian with a suspicious look, but his adults were very close by. So the teenager felt at ease. He was in his own territory. The boy only quickened his step. The little girl could barely keep up with him, treading the grass with her tiny booted feet. Then a young gypsy woman came out from the corner of the last house on the street. It was at once evident that this was the mother of the little singer. The little girl snatched her hand out of the boy's palm, rushed to the woman, and hugged her. The beautiful gypsy covered the girl's face with kisses and whispered something in her ear. The young singer laughed happily. Adrian stood there, unable to move. The young gypsy woman, her hair, her eyes, her eyebrows, her lips, she looked remarkably like Adrian's own grandmother. The same one that Amelie looked so much like. The man felt as if he had been doused with ice water. No, it couldn't be. The tanned face, the white teeth and smile, the massive gold earrings in her ears, and the mole on her cheek that Adrian remembered so well. This mole was shaped like a small heart. Amelie, too, was happy to have the same mark on her cheek as the unicorn from the cartoon. The woman noticed the stare of the stranger. The smile slowly faded from her face. She held the baby tighter to her and wanted to leave. But Adrian called out to her. "Amelie? Amelie?" The gypsy stopped. She stared at the older man for a moment, then walked toward him, still holding her daughter close to her. "I'm sorry," Adrian said. "Don't be frightened, please. I'm not going to hurt you. It's just that I need to." The man blurted out in surprise to himself. It was the first thing that came into his head. The dark-haired girl. She's from the Tabor. Everyone knows that gypsies make money by fortune-telling. Fortune-telling. The girl grinned. The baby in her arms smiled too. "All right, I'll tell fortunes." The boy nodded obediently and hurried to where the gypsies had stopped, following the teenager, who had almost reached the vacant lot. "Her name is Clementine." Adrian smiled, looking at the gypsy's face. He became more and more convinced that this was Amelie, his disappeared, grown-up daughter. He was aware that he might be wishful thinking, but there were too many coincidences. The song from his daughter's favorite cartoon sung by little Clementine, the bracelet on the girl's hand, the appearance of the young gypsy. "Yes, my daughter's name is Clementine," the girl finally answered. "What can I tell you?" "Many years ago, a long time ago, my daughter was kidnapped. She went for a walk with her mother. They got into a crowd. There was a crush, but the girl was never found. I'd like to know what happened to her. I'll pay you whatever you want." "Kidnapped daughter?" The gypsy woman's voice trembled. "It's scary, very scary. I'm not going to guess such things. I have a daughter myself. I don't want to get into trouble." "Then the question is, how did your little girl get that bracelet?" "Because my daughter had one just like it." Adrian realized that now the gypsy woman would turn around and leave, so he asked the main question. "I also have a question. Why did you call me Amelie? That was my daughter's name, and I thought you were her." "Yes," Adrian admitted, dazed by the direction their dialogue had taken. "My name is Oliver. Gypsies call me that. And the bracelet I've been wearing all this time has the name Amelie written on the back. That's why I came to you. Because you called me by that name. It's strange and interesting. I can't believe it. Apparently you really are my father. Tell me about yourself, please. Who are your parents? How long have you been in the Tabor? Were you born there?" Oliver shook her head negatively. "No, I'm a foundling. My father said he found me ragged and hungry at the train station." Oliver continued thoughtfully. "I don't remember that time myself. I was too young. But that bracelet has always been with me, ever since I realized myself. They said Grandma Rose gave it to me, and now I realize it's from another life. I always knew it. I ordered it for my daughter Amelie's 4th birthday." Adrian nodded. "It is the only one of its kind in the whole world. There could be no mistake. It was Amelie's. I think that's you. Tell me about yourself." Oliver sighed. "I will. From the very first time we were in this city, I immediately felt like I'd been here once. A lot of things were familiar. The cityscapes, even the smells, the sensations. And now this meeting. I want to figure it all out, too." Little Oliver always knew that Father Chicherin picked her up at the train station. Your relatives abandoned you. White people often do that, get rid of unwanted children, he said. We Roma have a completely different attitude to children. Chicherin's family already had 4 sons growing up. The only thing missing was a girl, so he took the little girl with him. Mother Camille, Grandma Rose, brothers Chicherin all treated Oliver with tenderness and care. Funny girl, loved, accepted. And when it turned out that the little girl has a beautiful voice and dances well, her popularity and value in the Tabor increased many times. Such a talented child could bring the family a lot of money. Oliver loved it when one of her brothers played the guitar and she danced and sang around the campfire in front of the admiring members of the Tabor. People would look at her, applauding, expressing approval. It was marvelous. The girl lived with her family in a van like the rest of their community. The Tabor roamed the country, stopping in one town or another. The scenery changed, the people changed, the houses changed. Oliver visited both large metropolitan cities and villages. She met new people and performed in squares and public gardens. That's how gypsies made money. They would stop near one settlement or another. And it started. Children danced, sang. The women would tell fortunes to anyone who wanted to. The men were doing some serious secret business of their own. It wasn't until she got older that Oliver realized what it was all about. It was stealing. That was why gypsies did not stay long in one place, fearing persecution, police retaliation. In principle, she liked that kind of life. She fell in love with strict Father Chicherin and affectionate grandmother Rose, Chicherin's mother, and brothers so different and so caring. Especially close relations with Oliver was with Grandma Rose. The old woman had a heart for her granddaughter, told her fairy tales, gave her jewelry, performed rituals on her to make Oliver happy and healthy. You are very lucky, because Chicherin found you at the station lonely, abandoned. No one needs, often said granddaughter. Who knows what could have happened to such a tiny girl if she had not fallen into good hands. They often told me bad things about my blood parents. Oliver scrutinized Adrian's face, trying to see familiar features. They said white people were irresponsible with their children. But I've seen different things on the streets of cities. Yes, there were street kids, but I'd also seen a lot of well-to-do families where the children were clearly happy and secure. So I concluded that it was my parents who were so bad, because good parents would not leave their children at the station. The young woman looked at Adrian with a challenge. He realized what was going on. If he really thought he was the girl's father, then he had once let it happen that a little girl was left alone at the train station, hungry, ragged, dirty. How did I end up at the train station? Asked the gypsy girl, looking the man straight in the eye. Didn't you keep an eye on your daughter? Or maybe you decided to get rid of her that way? What are you saying? Adrian objected. Our little Amélie was the most precious thing to us. Suddenly the man began to tell about those happy 4 years of life, that in his and Tiana's family lived a wonderful daughter. Adrian first told a long story about how hard they had gotten their daughter, then told about her early childhood. It was nice to remember those bright, warm moments. It turns out that he had forgotten almost nothing. And the joy of Amélie's first steps, and their joint travels and walks, and wonderful holidays that Tiana arranged for her daughter. Our girl loved unicorns and sang well, Adrian said. Just like your daughter Clementine. By the way, how does she know the song she sang at the fountain? It's our Amélie's favorite song. She also sang it in a very similar manner. Oliver didn't answer right away. It was as if she were trying to remember something. I taught it to her, she said at last. Something from my past life has stayed with me, not just the bracelet. I remembered that song. I, strangely enough, could read at the age of 4. That skill is still with me. We don't teach girls to read, only boys, and even then, superficially. But I read. Sometimes I have dreams about people who love me very much. I don't remember their faces at all, but I remembered warm, caring embraces. I thought I was making it up for myself. I've always had a good imagination. What else? Adrian asked. There's more. And just now when you were talking about it, I remembered something. Yes, I did ride a unicorn, a real unicorn. I dreamed about that scene several times. And the unicorn was exactly as you just described it. So, are we really daughter and father? We can say for sure only after the DNA test, Adrian said with a trembling voice. But it seems to be true. Oliver pressed her fingers to her temples, furrowing her brow, just like her mother did when she was worried. What are we supposed to do now? The girl asked confusedly, looking to the man for support. I think we should check everything out so that we both know for sure, and also to restore your documents. I don't doubt that you are Amelie, too, Adrian said. There are too many coincidences. I think you should go home or... Adrian's heart sank with a premonition of trouble. ... Or do you want to live in a tabor? You said you were happy with the gypsies? I did when I was a child. Oliver shook her head. When I grew up, things changed. The children in the tabor are treated very well, but as adults, life isn't sweet. A lot of chores. The need to obey the men without question. A husband can even beat his wife for disobedience. And nothing will happen to him. I can't do what I want to do, read, walk, study. And I'm forced to cheat people for money. That's the most unpleasant thing. But if I don't get the money in the evening, I'll be punished. I've been punished more than once. Then Oliver told the story of how Stacy gave her away in marriage. She was about 16 years old at the time. The family had chosen a good groom for their only daughter, the son of a well-to-do gypsy. Damien was as young as the bride. He was passionately in love with another, as the whole tabor knew. But that girl was no match for him, so marriage was out of the question. I cried before the wedding, Oliver recalled. I didn't want to get married, even though Damien was young and handsome and wealthy, but I felt like a child. And I knew about my fiancé's feelings for someone else. The whole tabor knew about it, but we did get married. Parents on both sides demanded the continuation of the family. That's how Clementine came into the family. Oliver never knew she could love someone so much. Her daughter became the meaning of her life, the light in the window. Damien was indifferent to me, and my daughter, Oliver, continued. He was running around to that girl he was seeing. Again, everyone in the tabor knew it, but the man was allowed to behave that way. Stacy hadn't minded or been jealous. Now she was completely absorbed in her daughter, singing songs to her, making up beautiful outfits for her, braiding her hair. Clementine inherited her mother's talent. She also sang and danced well. Naturally, the tabor decided to use the child's gift to the full. When the girl grew up, she was made a street singer, just like her mother. Once the girl performed in the squares of various cities and did it, it must be said, with pleasure. The audience applauded the little girl, generously paying for the performance. Clementine smiled happily. It was very disturbing to me, Oliver said. I realized that the little girl would have a future like mine. She wouldn't study, she wouldn't get a good profession. And she would continue to entertain people with her voice as she grew older and lost her childlike directness. She'll be a fortune teller. I dreamed of a different future for me and my daughter, Oliver continued. It seemed to me that we should both live differently, but it seemed impossible. I think they kidnapped you in the crowd, Adrian said, looking at his daughter. Yes, now he was certain that Emily was in front of him, and he was immensely sorry for the lost years that his daughter had to spend in the tabor, among strangers, obeying alien traditions and strict rules. But now everything would change. Is that possible? Oliver shook her head. It had never happened in my lifetime. But grandmother Rada told me that childless gypsy couples used to pick up children on the streets of towns. They picked out little ones who were unlikely to remember the past and raised them as their own children. And Grandma Rada said that the gypsies tried to kidnap dark-haired babies so as not to cause unnecessary questions later. A blonde child among dark-haired gypsies is suspicious. And you're a dark-haired child like my grandfather. Adrian smiled. I'll show you pictures later. The resemblance is amazing. That fact must have played against us too. The gypsies chose you because you looked something remotely like them. I still can't believe it, Oliver looked lost. She glanced back and forth at the tabor, visible from here, and back at Adrian. So you're going to leave right now? He asked. Will you go and get the baby, tell her you found your own, and never stay there again? I'll go with you, of course. But you never know. It's not that simple. They won't let me go. What do you mean they won't let you go? I'll call the police. They'll arrest them for kidnapping, Adrian said. No, we have to do it another way. You don't know these people. We have to do it under the radar. And then I have to leave here, because they will probably be looking for me and will find me sooner or later. Betrayal is severely punished here. Will you be in danger too? Think carefully. Do you want all this? Do you want to ruin your peaceful life? Take your time. This is an important decision. Well, what are you talking about? Of course I'm ready, Adrian immediately responded. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow I'll go with Clementine to the square. I have always accompanied her. We are followed during the day, in the morning to check, then at about 12. Then in the evening, at 11, come get us. There's usually no surveillance at that time. We'll have to hide, lay low for a while, maybe a week, maybe a month. They'll be looking for me. We'll hide here, in my apartment. No one will think of looking for you at my place. You live alone? Oliver asked. No one will mind us, Adrian said firmly. He thought of Stacy now, because she was going to get caught up in this too. She wouldn't have a choice. But the man was sure Stacy would understand, as she always did. She knows Amelia's story and is worried about her lover. The woman would be happy for him. She could definitely be trusted. No, Adrian shook his head negatively. I'm not alone. It's my mom. Your grandmother. Adrian shook his head negatively again. Tiana didn't wait for her daughter. She left without knowing what had happened to Amelie. It's so hurtful, so sad. I'll come for you tomorrow at 11. Okay, I have to go now. Oliver turned abruptly and hurried back to the Tabor. It looked like they were waiting for her there. For the rest of the day and night, Adrian was in a strange state of mind. He was overcome with joy. And then suddenly he began to have doubts. Suddenly Oliver was not a me after all. Standing next to the girl, the man had no doubt that it was his daughter. But now, when she was far away, he was beginning to think that he had invented the meeting and made up the facts to fit his story. Stacy, who had listened intently to Adrian, was also very agitated. She even cried. Unlike my favorite person, I'm sure everything will be okay now. Amelie is definitely Amelie. Well, there's no such thing as coincidence, the woman said. I can't wait to meet her and her daughter. Wow, this is even cooler than the movies. Adrian didn't sleep at night. Where would it start? He thought about the fact that Amelie and Clementine might not be at the fountain tomorrow. They might be interrupted. Amelie herself might change her mind, choose to live in a Tabor. Or she could have just tricked him. Why? I don't know why. Maybe she just likes fooling other people. Stacy called in sick from work that day. Adrian called his boss too, took unpaid leave. The man was at the fountain even earlier than planned. Little Clementine, as yesterday, delighted the audience with her clear, ringing voice. Oliver was not to be seen at first then. Then Adrian noticed her. She was sitting at a distance, watching her daughter closely. Their eyes met. The girl gestured for him to take his time. The man nodded understandingly. Adrian kept his eyes on his daughter and granddaughter. And of course he didn't miss the important moment. Oliver rose from the bench, walked quickly to Clementine, picked up the baby in her arms, then hurried to Adrian. Then they all walked together through the narrow streets to the parking lot where the man had left his car. Oliver kept turning around for fear of being followed, but there didn't seem to be any tail. Stacy welcomed the two fugitives, fed them, warmed them, and provided them with cozy, homemade clothes. She loved taking care of people. And here were two people in need of affection and comfort. Looking around, as if trying to remember the past, Oliver said, I've remodeled the apartment. It's completely different now. You are a professional editor with a higher philological education and 20 years of experience. Your task is to do a job with the text. It's not like when you lived here, Adrian said. But the view from the window seems familiar to me. The girl said thoughtfully, only something is missing. I think there was a tall tree. The branches scratched the glass. I liked it very much. They cut it down, Adrian replied, looking at his daughter in surprise. The poplar was blocking people's light, so they took it down. It's a pity. Adrian wandered along the seashore, clutching tightly in his hand the palm of his little granddaughter Clementine. The story that had happened to his family could not help but imprint on the man's behavior. He kept his eyes on the child. The grandfather and the girl were walking near the water's edge. Their bare feet left clear footprints in the wet sand. Clementine was inundated with questions, just like her mother used to be. She was a very clever and intelligent girl. She could grasp everything on the fly. She'd be going to school soon, and Adrian was sure that his granddaughter would be one of the best in the class. She could already read, write, and count. Clementine studied easily and with pleasure. Now Adrian saw his granddaughter off to music school. At a general family meeting, it was decided that such a talent should not be lost. So Amélie enrolled her daughter in music science. Teachers at first did not want to take the girl small yet, advised to wait a year before school. But after the audition, these people changed their opinion. It was sunny September. Classes at school had already begun. Clementine was now accompanied by her grandfather to her fourth lesson. So far, the girl was delighted with the music school. Adrian hoped she would continue to be so. And if not, what then? Were they looking for something else for Clementine? The man still couldn't believe his life had turned this way. Then, a year ago, Oliver and Clementine had lurked in the apartment for about a month. Tabor had long since taken off and left, but there were still gypsies snooping around town, looking, peering, and questioning people. This is how I would edit the continuation of the text. Even Adrian was once approached by a young guy asking if he'd seen where the gypsy girl was with a small child, adding further that she was mentally ill and very dangerous. During this confinement, Adrian was getting to know his daughter anew, getting to know his granddaughter. And also he and Svetlana carefully thought out a plan for Amélie's return. It was necessary to confirm the kinship DNA analysis, to write a statement to the police, to restore the documents, and most importantly, to teach Amélie to live in a new world for her. The latter was surprisingly easy, but with the documents there were problems. However, they were also solved. Amélie insisted on moving. She could not feel at ease in this city. They will come back. They will look for me to punish me for betrayal, assured the girl. But for the sake of happiness and peace of mind of his daughter, Adrian, as usual, was ready for anything. Svetlana supported him and offered to move to a small town by the sea, where her youngest son lived. And here they are, in a quiet, cozy place near the sea. Svetlana got a job at the local library. She enjoyed babysitting her grandchildren, her son's daughters, and Clementine. The girls have become friends. They have a lot of fun together. Amélie was slowly settling into her new world. She had once shown great promise. Tatiana dreamed of a scientific career for her daughter. But the years are irretrievably lost. The girl has no education, so she is studying at hairdressing courses, a demanded and creative profession. In addition, in the Tabor, Amélie liked to do hairstyles. Gypsies trusted her with their hair. In the evenings, the girl sang in the restaurant. The audience received her on a hurrah. The singer herself liked the scene, and the money was not superfluous. Adrian was now calm for his daughter. She will definitely not be lost. Smart, purposeful, hardworking. She immediately appeared in the new place, a lot of friends. She tried not to talk about her past, still afraid that rumors would spread and the gypsies would find her. Her daughter still had some fears to wrestle with. But nothing. Adrian and Svetlana were there for her, and together they could handle it. Clementine almost did not talk about life in the Tabor. New vivid impressions so far interrupted the memories. In time, much will be erased from childhood memory, but of course, and with it we'll have to work. That's it, Adrian commanded. In his free hand, he carried his flip-flops and his granddaughter's sandals. Why don't we take a dip? The water's so warm. We'll be quick, we won't be late for class, smiled the happy grandfather. Let's do it later, after class, agreed Clementine meekly. And then we'll go to the pond, city ducks to feed, okay, Buns? Adrian looked at his granddaughter, but saw in front of him little Amélie. She, too, often asked him to go to the pond so that the poor ducks would not go hungry. Adrian was quite happy. Now there is a daughter, a granddaughter, a woman he loves. Everything in his life was good. Only the thought of Tatiana did not give rest. The man desperately regretted that his wife never learned about the fate of his lost daughter. But there was nothing to be done. Grandfather, what are you thinking about? Clementine tugged at Adrian's arm, demanding an answer. Is your face sad again? Not sad, pensive, he smiled. I'm trying to decide whether we should go to the pizza place or the ice cream parlor after class." "I don't know," the girl said, puzzled, and then smiled slyly. "Grandpa, do I have a pensive face like yours right now?" Adrian looked at this bright, happy child and smiled. All sad thoughts immediately left his head. It was impossible to be gloomy around his noisy granddaughter. Hurrying to catch the last bus, Tiffany saw the girl. Deciding to walk her home, she froze when she saw. Tiffany was not particularly attracted to agriculture, but she was not irritated by the 6 acres of land. She had a cooperative nature, especially when it came to the interests of people close to her. It had been her mother's hobby, but since Tiffany loved it, she'd learned to find joy in going to her home. It was good that the dacha was not far from their home. If you go light, it was quite possible to get there in half an hour, for example, on a weekend in the summer. In the morning grip, it was even pleasant to make a walk. However, it was not necessary to make a march. Public transportation came to the rescue. A surprisingly long bus route ran past the massif, connecting the railroad station with a large factory almost on the border of the city. Such a neighborhood turned out to be very fortunate. After all, in a sense, the modest plot, which in the past years had been particularly difficult for the whole country and their family in particular, became a real salvation. Whether it was so coincidental, or whether the quarrel between mom and dad was a consequence of the events that took place, but only the man filed for divorce. All his numerous relatives, who used to often go to them on occasion, and what is much more often, without reason, as if completely forgot the way to the hospitable apartment of Tiffany's grandparents. The girl once overheard a conversation between adults and realized that her father is not only that the car and garage for himself left behind, so also part of the other property would not mind to get. Only failed dacha and apartment allocated to the grandmother. So after the divorce, greedy former tongue did not get a centimeter. The offended man paid a tiny alimony, and with Tiffany meetings did not look for meetings, crossed out of his life, as if he did not have a daughter. The girl was unpleasant, right up to tears, but she realized that her sobs upset her loved ones, so she carefully hid her sadness. The family had shrunk dramatically to Tiffany, her mom, and Peter's grandparents. One had to move on with life. Visiting the fazenda and struggling to harvest crops were perhaps the most effective ways of coping. They grew potatoes, cucumbers, and carrots on 6 hectares. Since they no longer had a car, it would have been much more problematic to transport the crops home without a bus. And so they carried home even tomatoes, which did not always have time to turn red in the fleeting summer heat. The green fruits, after the usual household processing in the kitchen, were transformed into a wonderful salad that livened up their meager menu. Under the guidance of her grandmother Maggie and her mother, the very young Tiffany peeled the carrots required by the recipe and hummed a simple song about the evergreen tomato and the magical land of lemonade. Thinking back, the woman marveled at the optimism of the adults in her family. They showed it even in their darkest moments. Soon after Tiffany's father divorced her mother, there was such a sad period when there was no money in the house at all. The father completely, including child support, disappeared from his daughter's life a few years after the divorce. The grandparents and mom worked at the same factory. And there, as luck would have it, wages were delayed, severely delayed. After a few months, the money from the modest savings melted away. Tiffany realized that her relatives were protecting her, trying to shield her from excessive involvement in adult problems. However, it was impossible to ignore the fact that store-bought sweets and even her favorite cheap sausage, which turned into a bizarre funnel after cooking, were almost absent from the table. In an effort to be helpful, Tiffany ran around the neighborhood, collecting bottles in a bag sewn by her grandmother. Then the girl turned in fines, because for clean glassware in the reception center paid a little more, and bought home bread or something else necessary. For a short period there were problems with transportation. Buses stopped following the schedule because their number on the line was drastically reduced. As a result, it became almost impossible to squeeze into the cabin with bags, so Grandpa Peter designed 2 handy maneuverable bag carts. The one that was larger in capacity, the man most often drove himself, and when for some reason could not go to the dacha, always warned. "Girls, how will you go home from the farm? Take a cart and load these." The smaller cart was usually driven by Nina, Tiffany's mom. And when the load was not too heavy, she entrusted it to her daughter. In this way, together and supporting each other, They overcame all difficulties. By the time Tiffany got her passport, she had become disillusioned with almost everything male, and taking her mom's maiden name, became Lucina after her grandfather Peter. He alone was a real pillar in their little family. Resourceful, optimistic, humorous about the most difficult situations, Grandpa Peter managed to always and everything in time, and never once reproached his daughter Mary for not keeping his marriage with her husband. Tiffany had often thought lately about the fact that her parents had split up when her mother had been almost as old as she was now. In some ways, their fates were similar. Tiffany's marriage, too, had crumbled like a sandcastle under the onslaught of fleeing waves. However, she and her husband Victor had no children. It was consensual at first. Although Tiffany was already 26 years old, they decided to live for themselves. Then somehow abruptly Victor got involved in a career race, and it so happened that he, successful and purposeful, was carried away by his colleague, the same energetic and ambitious. 3 years of calm and outwardly prosperous marriage was defenseless before passionate passion. However, this turn of fate, Tiffany did not consider this tragedy. After quite civilized divorces passed almost 2 years, and even a slight regret, perhaps, not left, it was much more difficult for the fragile mother. The child, though entering the difficult age of adolescence, must be brought up, dressed, fed, and times were troubled. Although it was tight then, but still more often Tiffany's memories of the first 15 years of her life had a light tinge of sadness. After all, Grandpa Peter and Grandma Maggie were alive then. Their family had dealt with adversity together. It was much easier financially now, and Tiffany felt incredibly sorry that they didn't see both daughter and granddaughter living quite well. Sometimes, though, it seemed to Tiffany, especially at the cottage, that her grandparents were not far away. It was as if she heard her grandmother's gentle voice from somewhere to the side of the house. "Tiffany, come here. The raspberries are ripe, come and eat." Or grandfather will enter the gate, smiling, looking triumphant, showing a bucket with caught fish, and will ask his wife, daughter and granddaughter, "Well, honorable ladies, what will you taste today, soup, cooked or fried fish?" How many pleasant things were associated with the cottage. Now it has partially lost its role as a food base. Potato plantation reduced to a few bushes, just to eat young boiled tubers with dill, and gave way to a flower bed. Of course, there were still beds for tomatoes and cucumbers, but the crop was now mostly fruits and berries. Most importantly, though, it was easy to find a peacefulness to which sadness was mixed in the small plot, where probably every handful of earth was familiar. Tiffany and her mother also enjoyed going to the cottage, but it had been 2 weeks since her mother had been in a sanitarium at her daughter's insistence. The ordeal of her youth had taken its toll. Yesterday on the phone, her mother asked her to pick berries, water the plantings, and deal with the weeds that had surely grown. And Tiffany had allotted the second half of Wednesday without objection to go to the cottage. She left work early, as there was nothing urgent, and set off. Tiffany picked currants, weeded the cultivated plants, watered the plants, and filled containers with water. When she was tired, she took a bite of the bun she had thoughtfully brought with her and made a morsel, the best way to fight the heat and fatigue, much better than a sweet, cold drink. She lay down to rest for a while and suddenly fell asleep. Tiffany's awakening was swift. The transition from summer twilight to a velvet night was certainly a pleasant moment, but only if one had time to enjoy it. Right now, that luxury was beyond the woman's reach. The clock on her smartphone screen mockingly suggested that she had to hurry, or the last scheduled bus would leave for home without her. In that case, either she would have to take a walk at a time not too suitable for that, or spend the night at the dacha. Then she would have to rush home on the morning bus, leave the harvest and fly to work on the wings of responsibility. Tiffany quickly put the harvest in her bag and hurried to the bus stop. A woman was in a hurry, and when she saw a skinny little girl sitting on a bed of huge tires near one of the lots, she passed by. Tiffany took a few steps, but a vague realization prevented her from going any further. An elementary school-aged child alone had no business being outside. Tiffany was familiar with the owners of this lot since they had purchased it, so she could definitely say she'd never seen this little girl before. Of course, the girl could have been brought in for a visit and just out for a walk. But the dark windows of the cottage made it clear that it was empty. Either everyone was sleeping there, having forgotten about the little guest who had gone for a walk. The second assumption was obviously ridiculous, so she was unlikely to have anything to do with the owners of the plot near which she had settled. Even in the not very bright light of the lanterns that chased the darkness out of the cottage, the girl's unhappy look indicated that she had been caught up in some difficult life situation. Of course, Tiffany became alarmed. Could this supposedly chance encounter be part of some scam? She'd recently read a story on the internet on her way home from work about a man who'd almost gotten into a lot of trouble because of his helpfulness, and had only miraculously escaped from a trap set by criminals. No, the woman firmly rejected suspicions of the girl's involvement in fraud. Of course, the possibility of criminal background of her appearance in the dacha remained, and Tiffany's intuition was screaming, "This little stranger needs help." Mentally brushing aside her fears, the woman turned and asked, "Are you expecting someone, or are you lost?" The girl shuddered and said, "Excuse me, but I need help. I went into the bus. There were a lot of people. I wanted to pay the fare. I didn't have my wallet in my bag." Here's the revised text with the sequel. "I had my school pass and money in there. They even took out my cell phone," the girl continued. "It's a simple push-button phone, but it still hurt. I tried to explain to the conductor that I must have had all my valuables taken from me in the crowd. She got mad and told me to walk. So here I am, walking to the dachas. I turned around to wait out the heat. Tried to ask for money, but no one will give me any." Tiffany sat down next to the girl on the tire and asked, "Where are you going?" Judging by the address the girl had given her, she had to catch a bus to the city center. Just like Tiffany, the woman didn't hesitate and commanded, "Come on then, let's go faster. I'll pay your fare." The girl was incredibly excited and, taking one of Tiffany's bags of berries to help, kept saying thank you on the way to the bus stop. Soon the woman and the girl were already sitting in the stuffy salon, and the stranger asked, "You me, please, your phone number dictate. I'll memorize it and return it to you later." Tiffany looked closely at her companion. Her initial assumption that she was about 7 years old had been wrong. She was clearly older by her judgment, the way she constructed her phrases. The woman smiled. "Don't worry, I won't be poor. What's your name, girl?" "Janie," she introduced herself. "Nice to meet you." "I'm Tiffany." "Well, we meet again. Maybe we should let your family know that you're okay and that you're on your way home." Janie lowered her head and confessed, "Thanks. But I don't remember my mom's phone number by heart." The woman noticed that her companion, apparently tired from the day's worries, was falling into and out of sleep, and she put her shoulder to her. "Don't be shy, rest. I'll wake you up before your stop." The girl, desperately holding back a yawn, asked again, "Do you have farther to go?" Tiffany nodded. She didn't want to make the girl feel uncomfortable by explaining that she had decided to walk her straight home and hand her over to her relatives. The central city neighborhood where Auberine was headed was too dubious. There, old houses growing into the ground, neighbored with new high-rises, and the tenants, according to media reports, were being resettled in improved neighborhoods. The townspeople, of course, understood that the former residents of the center found themselves literally on the outskirts, and the most intransigent were simply squeezed out by unfavorable circumstances to an unprofitable resettlement. Wooden houses regularly flared up like matches, making room with minimal cost to the developers. Occasionally, as she drove by, Tiffany noticed that many of the buildings were vacant, or more likely were havens for antisocial elements and hooligans. Of course, the woman was uneasy, but it was unwise to walk the streets of the neighborhood with a girl at this late hour. Auberine trustingly nestled into the shoulder of her unexpected patroness as she passed her bus stop. Tiffany sighed, realizing it would be a while before she could return home because of her good gusto. After sending her mom a text message saying goodnight, she thought about everything and nothing. Thoughts about work were replaced by thoughts about the need to arrange her personal life, and then switched to thoughts that by Friday, with the established heat, planting at the dacha would be difficult. Finally, the bus brought Tiffany and Auberine to their desired stop. After a short walk down a nearly unlit street, the girls stopped at a ramshackle cottage. Before Auberine could even get the key out, the door swung open. A woman in a stretchy t-shirt and tight shorts and bicycle shorts came out and started yelling. "What are you doing, Auberine?" Where's the money your father gave you? I called him and I know you left him. And I thought you'd run away after you'd made a fortune. I thought I'd put out a bolo. Behind the shrieking woman came a group of skinny children, a girl about the same age as Auberine, a boy a little younger, and a tiny little girl who crawled after the older ones. Auberine began to ramble on and on about the situation she was in. Tiffany froze, unable to say anything or even move. Dumbfounded by what she saw, Tiffany wanted to turn around and walk away, but her legs felt like they were stuck to the pavement. The woman shouting at Auberine was very familiar to her. It was her former best friend, and now nemesis Laurel Gordieva. Years ago, she had separated Tiffany from Damien, her first strong love. Now, from the height of her age, Tiffany realized she shouldn't have shared personal secrets with Laurel. But back then, at the tender age of 16, she believed in an unbreakable friendship and was embarrassed to discuss sensitive topics with her mother and grandmother. Laurel learned from Tiffany herself that Damien insisted on intimacy, arguing that they would definitely get married when his beloved turned 18. So what did it matter when they became intimate? Tiffany was almost in agreement. The guy's arguments seemed convincing, and she was ready to forget the moral principles instilled by her older relatives. She kept humming the naive popular song about the airplane in love, the lines of which accurately described her story, "I love you, Damien." Tiffany wanted a guy who didn't doubt her feelings. The only hitch was wanting to make the first time something special, which made the preparations take longer. But while she doubted and planned, Laurel acted. As a result, a little embarrassed, Damien, who came to the date, announced to Tiffany that he was dumping her. "Understand, it's not about you. You're a great person, and you'll easily find your happiness." He said something else in the same vein, but the girl didn't seem to hear. Then she turned and ran, not noticing the puddles under her feet. Of course, Tiffany rushed to Laurel, hoping for support and advice on how to get her boyfriend back. But instead of sympathy, she heard the hard truth. Tiffany remembered Laurel telling her, "Tiffany, Damien and I are together now. I happen to be expecting a child with him. You don't take offense, okay, with that announcement?" It was as if Tiffany's entire upbringing had evaporated. She could hardly remember a tenth of what she'd said to her friend who'd become an ex-girlfriend overnight. But people who stabbed her in the back were a nightmare to forget. Luckily, Damien's father was in the military. Thanks to that, the traders hadn't been in town long. Laurel had already left with a noticeable belly on her normally slender figure to follow her lawfully wedded husband, Damien. Tiffany tried not to think about the insolent trader and the despicable friend. For a long time, she kept away from the male sex, communicating only dryly and only on business, except for her mother and grandmother. Tiffany calculated that it had been 15 years since that bitter 17th year. That was how long she hadn't seen Laurel or Damien, and she purposely changed the subject whenever someone she knew started talking about them. Catherine, accidentally meeting Tiffany on the street, once tried to talk to her. However, the proud girl said she had to run away. Catherine then, according to rumors, went to her daughter, but Tiffany did not care, only to never see or hear about the traitors again. The girl suffered, experiencing everything deep inside herself, and only her future husband Andrew was able to melt the ice in her heart. He conquered with politeness, care, the ability to reason on various topics. Tiffany responded to his advances, realizing that the emergence of sympathy influenced the fear of being a lonely old maid after the betrayal. Tiffany married Andrew, probably only because he was the opposite of Damien, both in appearance and in character. But still, their life together didn't work out. Tiffany was about to leave, but suddenly Laurel turned her attention from the nearly crying Oberyn to her and shouted just as loudly, though more joyfully. "Tiffany, oh shit, that's right, Tiffany, it's you. I'm looking at you, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at you. And you're still beautiful. Good for you. You haven't changed much, but you look a little tired. Come in. As if you're not my dear, come in." Barely knocking down Oberyn, who was standing in front of Tiffany, Laurel grabbed her old friend by the wrist as she was holding her bags and pulled her inside the house. Come in. Hurry up and sit and talk. It's been so long since we've seen each other. I have 4 children already. How about you?" Tiffany was shocked, because suddenly realized that Laurel does not suffer even a shadow of shame for what happened between them in the past. "What are you looking at?" "Hey," the hostess shouted at her older children. Matthew, take Janie to the playpen in the nursery. Put her in the playpen. Stacy, Oberon, into the kitchen now. Peel the potatoes quickly. Put the water on the fire. We'll talk to you later. Oberon, will you pay me back for my transgression? I sent you on such an important task as an adult and you ruined it. Now you're going to sit on cards and boxes. No matter how Tiffany tried to explain to her ex-girlfriend that she had no time, that she had to go home, it was as if her words never reached Laurel. As soon as the peeled potatoes were in the boiling water, her mother shouted at her elders. Everyone run away from here quickly. Stay in the nursery and don't make a sound. Do not prevent us from sitting and chatting. You see, Laurel said to Tiffany, 4 kids and you have to be in charge, or there's no escape. They're not all the same age. Matthew's 14, Auburn's 12, Max is 5. And Janie will be 2 soon. They all need different kinds of supervision. The atmosphere in the kitchen wasn't very pleasant and didn't lend itself to socializing. Although Tiffany was not a spoiled, refined young lady and could easily have lived in a much smaller space, she was uncomfortable here. Dirty dishes towered in the sink and on the table. The sour odor was unpleasantly associated with a full trash can that seemed to be somewhere in the kitchen. Intercepting the gaze of the unexpected guest, the hostess explained. From the neighboring construction site, the plumbing was damaged. So I'm waiting for them to fix it. Then I'll make the children salt and wash everything. And so, to cook and wash hands, we carry from the column from the neighboring street. Tiffany sat on the not-too-comfortable stool as if hypnotized and looked at Laurel, not understanding how she had turned from a real beauty into a hobbit Alice, a woman of the most disgraceful type. The woman laughed loudly, throwing back her head and talking excitedly. Oh, Tiffany, you should thank me to the grave that I saved you from such a gift as Damien. I thought his father was a military man, about to take a well-deserved retirement. He'll get an apartment, and we'll move to a nice city somewhere. I had it all worked out so well. But Damien managed to get into a big fight with his father. As a result, we were 6 months away from the baby on our own. When we got a rented room, Damien started to get a bit of a headache, even truant, I'll tell you that. We were too quick to start a family with him. We were so green. In bed, we were okay, but there was nothing to talk about. Damien was kind of contemptuous of me. First in hints, and then he started saying that I'd been messing with him in front of his eyes. I tied him hand and foot with my pregnancy, as if he were a dog on a leash. Wherever they pull him, that's where he goes. Surprised beyond belief, Tiffany didn't know what to say to such revelations. But Laurel just seemed to need to talk. She continued her speech, not noticing that the guest was not comfortable listening to her. In general, soon enough I was bored. In retaliation, of course, with a neighbor began to have fun. Everything seemed to be going well, and then one day Damien and I had a fight. He got nervous, started throwing punches at me. My boyfriend smelled the stench of a beef and came out of the room through the hole, his heels glistening. Damien filed for divorce and I didn't fight it. He wasn't that good. All I could get from him was alimony for Laurel and for Oberon, who had conceived in marriage to him. Honestly, I don't know whose it was. I'm having money problems, as it happens. So I sent that silly girl over there for cash today. She was flapping her ears and she didn't have a phone. I got Matthew and Janie from my current husband, but he's almost a drunk. He stays away from home for days at a time. When he comes home, he's not happy either. But they're promising me a new apartment soon. I mean, we just moved here after Damien. We came here to get some extra perks on top of the alimony. He's doing well, the bastard. Found himself a woman who got him a cushy job. The official salary, however, with the Golubkin nose, but the gray is excellent. He's happy with the amount in the envelope every month. I know because I know a friend of mine works at the same company. Anyway, Damien's always willing to help, but he's always shying away. So we have to send the girls to him. He's brain dead when they start begging him. Of course, I was too quick. I gave birth to Stacy and Auburn for free. But with Matthew, it all worked out so well. It's as if they'd made the whole maternity fun thing for him. It was a pity, of course, that it wasn't cash in hand, but at least something to get something out of the unpleasant situation, excuse me. A little benefit. Laurel looked around and saw no other clean dishes except for a tray on which stood an ornate samovar. She quickly moved it directly to the dirty floor and moved the potatoes onto the improvised plate that had been vacated. After that, with her usual deft movement, she took out disposable cups from the cupboard, obviously used many times, and splashed a murky liquid from a bottle into them. "Don't be squeamish, Tiffany, it's my husband's drink. I can vouch for its quality, and it drinks like water and doesn't give you a headache in the morning," Laurel said. "Let's have a little drink and you can tell me about your life, your hobbies, where you work. And I'm all about me and myself. Listen, do you have kids? You don't look like you do. You don't have a belly. I'm only 6 months older than you. You can see my figure. So what? I'm good." Without waiting for the guest's answer, Laurel confirmed. "Of course I'm good. Don't think I'm not bragging, I just don't praise myself as often as I should. You should always praise yourself, you got everything on time. Look at you, Stacy's almost a bride. And I'm still young. Isn't that great? And you, Tiffany, it's time for you to have kids. A woman's clock is ticking. Before you know it, you'll be old and alone. So hurry up and find a man and have a baby, honey. Would you like me to tell Damien out the window that you need help with something so juicy?" I don't think he'd say no. He'll help, and then he'll stay out of the way. The baby's yours alone, no strings attached. Otherwise his wife, Jera, would be quick to deal with him. And Damien's no fool to break up a good marriage. So, shall I call? Tiffany's heart was troubled by the advice, the dubious proposal, and the unwelcome meeting with the insolent, unscrupulous Laurel. How dare she even dare give such advice while living in almost complete disarray? Tiffany felt physically suffocating in this environment, and as if awakening from an obsession, she wanted to tell her former friend what she thought. But she was prevented from doing so by the timid voice of Auberine from behind her. "Mother, can I have some potatoes? Matthew wants to eat, and I haven't had anything substantial to eat since this morning." Tiffany rose from her stool, making room. "Thanks for the offer, Laurel, but I really have to go. Besides, it's probably time for your kids to go to bed, too." Laurel was clearly unhappy that her youngest daughter had interrupted the party. Tiffany noticed that her former friend was barely restraining herself from being rude. Bags of harvested crops stood around the doorstep. Feeling a strange sense of pity, Tiffany pulled out the purse with her keys and wallet that was lying nearby and said, "These, Laurel, are vitamins for your children. Goodbye." The woman left the house of her former friend and, reaching the nearest tree, leaned against the trunk growing on the sidewalk. Memories surged in messy waves, filling her thoughts. How she'd hated Laurel and Damien back then, wished the worst for them. Now by chance she could see how the traders lived in poverty, but she felt no joy. I felt sorry for the children first and foremost, and I didn't feel sorry for Damien and Laurel, whom she had once thought up the most painful punishments for. Tiffany called out to the girl, catching up with her. "Oberyn, you still haven't given me a phone number. Please, here's a piece of paper and a pen. Write it down for me." Tiffany had no desire to communicate with anyone related to Laurel, though. She, tired and mentally drained, complied with the girl's request. Auberyn smiled, flashing her white teeth in the semi-darkness, and asked, "May I, when I have a phone again, call you sometimes?" "I will." Tiffany nodded and advised, "Go home, Auberyn. You've had a rough day. Eat and go to bed." The girl waved her hand and ran home. Tiffany waited until the door closed and hurried to her house. The late hour left no chance of public transportation still running on the city streets. She had to leave the neighborhood filled with construction sites and hurry to get to her own apartment so she could finally rest from the unexpected events. Surprisingly, the woman felt calm, as if a guardian angel had spread its wings over her. After reaching home and taking a shower, she went to bed. Whether because of nervous tension or because of the prolonged vacation at the cottage, but sleep did not come to Tiffany. She counted sheep and used other techniques, but nothing helped. The events of the past came back to her mind, mixing with each other. Tiffany couldn't understand if Laurel had never felt guilty about having crossed the line of decency. Of course, there was no telling how her relationship with Damien would have turned out, but there was a chance it might have been a good one. Maybe they'd have children too. A separate cause for excitement was the fact that the traders now lived in the same city as her. Although it was large, the likelihood of chance encounters increased. The devil dared me to linger at the dacha, and then notice the sad girl and help her. If I had known in advance whose daughter Oberon was, I would have passed by or just given money for a ticket. It's true. You can't do good without doing evil, Tiffany thought. With the accompaniment of such disturbing, provoking thoughts, she finally fell into a restless sleep. It was still a cool early summer morning, but it looked like it was going to be another hot day due to the sudden work troubles. Tiffany hadn't even remembered the meeting the night before. But in the evening, during the traditional phone conversation with Maggie's mother, the woman's sadness, again caused by the unpleasant impressions of meeting her ex-girlfriend, had returned. "I'll tell you everything," Maggie said flatly. "Daughter, you've grown up to be a wonderful, merciful person. But remember, when you lend a helping hand, it's important to dodge the kick of gratitude. Tiffany, I'm begging you, please don't feel sorry for Laurel. She chose her own fate. It's not your fault she has 4 kids now. You gave them vitamins, and that's enough. Don't show acts of support even for the children and feel sorry for Laurel. It's not their fault, of course, but you should stay away from such arch-traitors who sacrifice their friendship for their own happiness. If I understand anything in life, it's that Laurel could hardly have changed for the better. Forget about her and don't think about her. What if she shows up? Send her away. It's a shame you gave her daughter your phone number. But I understand. You're tired. You're confused. It's okay, though. If Laurel has the nerve to call, block her number, and that's it. The less you talk to people like that, the better. You can't expect anything good from a sneaky traitor." Tiffany promised her mom that she would never respond favorably to Laurel's attempts to get close again, and she calmed down a little. Indeed, personally, her Tiffany was clear before her own conscience. She had helped the girl unselfishly, from the heart. And that was the end of it. Perhaps if she had known that she would run into her former friend while walking her home, she would have parted ways with the girl on the street corner and just watched her walk through the door. However, things happened the way they did, and thus there is no need to speculate as to what the if only would have been like. Moreover, no responsibility for Laurel's children is imposed on her by this act. She, Tiffany, is not an angel, a saint, or blessed. She will certainly not be able to forgive the betrayal of even 15 years ago. Nor, of course, is she going to take revenge. No need to dirty her hands and conscience. And she is sick, to be honest. At first it was so painful that it was hard to breathe. But she had endured, survived, restored herself, pulling herself out from under the rubble of her great and bright love. Tiffany had no desire to socialize with people who had suddenly popped up out of the past. Maggie's mother returned from the sanitarium, and the sincere joy and mutual love of seeing a loved one reigned again in their little friendly family. Together, the women celebrated it at their favorite dacha, a small but important event, and life continued according to the long-established order. The rest of the summer passed quietly. For a while, Tiffany was wary of receiving calls from unknown numbers, fearing to hear her daughter Laurel's voice. But gradually that fear receded. The golden fall was bountiful with a bumper crop of apples, and to Tiffany's delight, neither Laurel nor Damien appeared on the horizon. It was with some trepidation that she passed by the plot where she had once met the daughter of a former friend. But in time, that feeling was a thing of the past, especially after she met Alexander. It happened not far from the bus stop. A man in a simple domestic car slowed down when he saw 2 women pulling carts too slowly and offered a ride. If Maggie hadn't been feeling a little unwell that evening due to the change in weather, the approaching fall, she probably would have found a reason to refuse such a courtesy. Tiffany took charge, however, and after thanking the driver for his indifference, helped her mother into the cabin. By this time, the bags were already in the trunk, carefully stowed there by a helpful man. The driver introduced himself on the way and even took a tonometer out of the glove compartment and handed it to Maggie, suggesting that she take her blood pressure just in case and stop by a hospital or pharmacy if she needed it. The readings were quite acceptable. After asking for the address of the new acquaintances, the man soon drove Maggie and Tiffany to their driveway and then helped carry their bags into the apartment. Alexander refused the offered tea, but gratefully accepted a bag of apples. He also asked Tiffany for her phone number. They began to meet, and Sasha gradually became his own in the small female kingdom, helping as much as he could both at the dacha and in the apartment. Although both Maggie and Tiffany tried not to burden Alexander with their problems, he categorically refused to accept money from them for his help. The only thing that alarmed Maggie was that the man was very sparing about himself. Alexander described his fate punctiliously, schematically, and without details. He was born in one of the republics of the former Soviet Union, and then was forced to leave there with his family. He learned to be an automobile mechanic and got a job. Then he was called up for compulsory military service, went to a hot spot. He came back, got married, divorced, no kids. He works, lives in a rented apartment, but is already looking for an apartment in the mortgage. When Alexander was asked about his relatives, he shut up and asked to give him time to talk about everything himself when he was ready. Thus, Tiffany, not limited in her fantasies, decided that Alexander had some tragedy in his past that was still painful and difficult for him to remember. Maggie felt a slight distrust of her new acquaintance. Too easily he found common ground with her daughter. Alexander liked the same music and movies as Tiffany. He could easily continue a sentence she started, and often fully agreed with any of her opinions. The man didn't force things, but he also became more and more firmly established in Tiffany's life. It got to the point where he drove her to work, brought her home, drove her to and from the cottage. At first, Maggie accepted the man favorably, but gradually her gratitude for his help was replaced by wariness too impeccable, he seemed to her. Alexander was overly polite, always tidy, and without the slightest sign of having worked in a car repair shop. Never had she seen signs of repair on his hands like her ex-husband's, and his desire to constantly monitor Tiffany's movements was disturbing. One day, Maggie decided to share her suspicions with her daughter. "Tiffany, you listen to me calmly. Some too flawless, this Alexander. Everything seems smooth and smooth and smooth, but think about it. When does he manage to work, if almost personal driver for you, and on a voluntary basis? I'm sorry, but I don't believe in altruism in today's world. I don't believe in altruism in today's world. Maybe you're secretly giving him gas money from me." At least Tiffany even took a little offense. "Why, just for nothing, gratuitously? Just because he likes me? I'm not an option for a ride." After a moment's silence, the young woman tried to smooth out the harshness of the said phrase, and, as if surprised, confessed. "In general, I offered Alex to pay the expenses, but he flatly refused. I think, Mom, you're worrying for nothing. Don't you and I deserve to meet a good, unselfish man?" Maggie wanted to believe in a miracle, but she tried to convince her daughter not to be so quick to open her heart to Alex. "That's right. You certainly deserve happiness. But don't rush, think it over calmly. After all, Alex does not show any details of his life, any emotions about the situation in the past and present. When I begin to question him, he evades answers or says what we have already heard from him, as if an actor who has studied his role and adheres to it without any improvisations. Not once has he snapped, not once has he said anything unnecessary. Okay, I understand it can be hard to remember the war, but otherwise, why is he so reserved?" Tiffany only grumbled at such a claim. "Mom, I can't get enough of you. Remember about Andrew? You told me he was too loose? Alex is reserved, a little verbal. And you're not like that again." Maggie wasn't glad she'd had this conversation with her daughter, and she certainly hadn't expected it to lead to a fight, splitting their understanding, which had seemed unshakable. Tiffany retreated to her room, showing that she had no intention of continuing this conversation any further. And her mom wondered. Maybe she really wasn't being entirely objective about Alex, really, but there was a chance that he was a man of business and not inclined to be candid about himself, and her suspicions were aroused by her mother's jealousy. No, Maggie decided, I would no longer interfere with my daughter's relationship with her chosen man, but I would keep a close eye on him, so as not to miss any alarm bells. Maggie pondered, so what if Tiffany is already in her 4th decade? To me, she'll always be my favorite little girl, the one I'll always protect. The woman's doubts hadn't disappeared, but now she stopped troubling her daughter with her speculations. No matter how Maggie felt about Alex, she couldn't help but admit that it would have been much more difficult to prepare the cottage for winter without his help. The man diligently fulfilled all the requests and even made reasonable suggestions. He clearly had experience in this kind of work. But Alex again gracefully evaded answering the question about where he had learned all the wisdom of dacha management. About a week before the festive New Year's Eve party, the man brought a slender fir tree with fluffy short needles to Tiffany's apartment, explaining, "I thought that you grow all sorts of flowers at the cottage yourself, and it would be silly to give their Dutch counterparts. And kind of more thematic, Tiffany tucked the fragrant beauty into a vacant corner and asked, "Why do you have to give flowers today?" Which of course are less spectacular than a Christmas tree. There was a touch of resentment in Alex's voice. "How is it, Tiffany, that you don't remember that today is exactly 3 months since we met so casually but happily? It has become a very important event for ME.3. Tiffany was confused. "I'm sorry, Alex, I'm sorry, but we've had a busy New Year's Eve at the firm, so it slipped my mind. No offense." The man smiled and admitted not at all. "I read somewhere that resentment is the province of petty people. So, honey, I'm not even offended. In fact, I just wanted to do something nice for you. And since there was a Christmas tree market on the way, I thought a tree would be perfect." Maggie, listening to the conversation between her daughter and her boyfriend, was ashamed of her doubts about Alex. He sounded very convincing. Besides, the man had quietly agreed to spend the holiday with Tiffany and her mom. Part of Maggie's suspicions that Alex was married had been planted. Would a family man be so easily excused from being at home at a set table with his relatives? Hardly. On the festive evening, Alex gave Maggie a beautiful shawl in the Pavlov-Posadzki style, and Tiffany presented her with perfume. 15 minutes before midnight, the man asked for some attention and made an unusually long speech for him. "Dear Maggie and Tiffany, in the past year, the most significant event for me was the chance encounter I had with you. And I think it was the greatest good fortune of my life. In fact, it was only because of you that I realized what true family support and the warmth of home means. I would love to see Tiffany enter the coming year already in her new status. I'm sorry I'm worried." The man touched, then turned to Tiffany and her mom. "Maggie, please, your daughter's hands. Believe me, she'll have no reason to be displeased with me. Do you mind?" Maggie looked questioningly at her daughter with happy eyes that sparkled brighter than the lights on a Christmas tree and shrugged. "I think, Alex, it's worth asking Tiffany's opinion as well. Whatever she decides is the way to go." Alex nodded in agreement with the woman's words, pulled a box out of his pocket, and opening it, showed it to Tiffany. "Let me put it on for you as a token of our engagement." Tiffany smiled shyly, holding out her hand to the man. Maggie wiped the corners of her eyes, trying not to smear her mascara. At the party table, Alex began to suggest options for the celebration. "I think it makes sense to choose a wedding date closer to summer, sit in a cafe, and then go on vacation to your Maggie, wonderful dacha, partly thanks to which our acquaintance took place. After that, frankly, I'd like to go to the seaside for a week or so. How would you feel about that? Tiffany, will you be able to get a vacation this summer?" Tiffany glowed and was already mentally calculating what period to ask her bosses for. Then she suddenly realized. "Mom, how are you going to deal with the cottage in my absence?" Maggie waved her hands. "Oh, don't worry about that. Dacha should be a pleasure, not a chore. Plan your holiday as you see fit. By the way, Alex, we should probably notify your relatives about such an important event and get to know them in general. It wouldn't hurt." It was obvious from Alex's pale face that Maggie had touched on a sore subject, but he replied, "Alas, I have no one to introduce you to. I'm sorry, but this is a somewhat sore subject for me. I'm going to go to the landing for some air." The man left the table, and Tiffany whispered indignantly to her mother, "Why did you have to ruin Alex's mood? Everything was going so great. He seems to have some unpleasant memories of the loss of his loved ones. You and I have talked about this before, haven't we?" Maggie began to apologize. "Daughter, I didn't mean to offend Alex. That's it. I won't ask another question." "Don't worry," Tiffany replied. When Alex returned to the table, he was behaving as if nothing had happened, and the festivities returned to a pleasant course. In their joint minds, they decided to get married in the spring and April and postpone the wedding trip until the velvet season. The days of the coming year flew by. Alex even began to take Tiffany to look at apartments. However, out of all the abundance of options, there was no perfect match. Maggie was happy for her daughter, but made another attempt to check Alex's identity. The man's social networking page was boring and devoid of any hints about his relatives. He published photos of cars that he happened to repair, arranged reposts with contests. The woman did not notice anything objectionable and quietly began to prepare for the upcoming wedding of her daughter. One day, Alex picked Tiffany up after work, as usual, and the woman noticed that her fiancé was even more taciturn than usual. Watching him from the passenger seat, she could see the man's eyebrows furrowed and his jowls playing. The atmosphere in the interior of the car was tense, and unable to stand it, the woman asked, "Alex, what's going on? Is something wrong? Is there anything I can do to help?" The man turned off the avenue into the mall parking lot, stopped the car, and turned around to Tiffany. Alex didn't look like the happy groom preparing to say goodbye to his bachelorhood. After a moment's silence, he spoke. "Tiffany, I have a serious problem. The wedding may have to be postponed." Tiffany was startled. "What happened?" And Alex, looking his bride in the eye, shared his problems. "In order to make more money, I've started moonlighting at one other place for cash in addition to my usual garage service. So on the night of today, burned boxes, in which stood driven to repair cars to which I had access, and some even repaired. Anyway, they decided to hold me responsible for the fire. The amount I have to pay is huge. I've already given all my savings, but it's like a drop in the ocean. I've been going to banks all day, but with the salary I can show officially. There are no decent offers. They threaten to cripple me and even find other ways to influence me. I'm terribly afraid that you or your mom might get hurt because of these scoundrels." Tiffany was shocked. She had seen a report on the city's news site about a fire in the industrial area, but she had no idea that this emergency would affect her so closely. The woman ran a soothing gesture across her fiancé's cheek and tried to say absolutely calmly, "So it's no trouble. We won't cancel anything. Now I will transfer you money from my card, so that you at least part of the debt paid. We will go to apply exactly on the day we planned, and we will play the wedding without making changes and postponements. The only thing is, we'll have to sacrifice some fun. But it's not a big deal. It is quite possible to do without a banquet and a trip to the sea. Life is long. We'll have time for everything." Alex intercepted Tiffany's hand and began to shower her with kisses. "Thank you, sweetheart, for your support. We'll see. Maybe the insurance company will figure it out and the claim against me will be dropped. Of course, that would be the best option." The man turned off the avenue into the mall parking lot and stopped the car. He turned around to Tiffany. Alex didn't look like the happy groom preparing to say goodbye to bachelorhood. After a moment's silence, he spoke. "Tiffany, I have a serious problem. The wedding may have to be postponed." Tiffany was startled. "What happened?" Alex, looking his bride in the eye, shared his problems. "In order to make more money, I've started moonlighting at one other place for cash in addition to my usual garage service. So on the night of today, burned boxes in which there were cars for repair, to which I had access and some even repaired. Anyway, they decided to hold me responsible for the fire. The amount I have to pay is huge. I've already given all my savings, but it's a drop in the ocean. I've been going to banks all day, but with the salary I can show officially. There are no decent offers. They threaten to cripple me and even find other ways to influence me. I'm terribly afraid that you or your mom Maggie might get hurt because of these rascals." Tiffany was shocked. She had seen a report on the city news site about a fire in the industrial area, but she had no idea that this emergency would affect her so closely. She ran a soothing gesture across her fiancé's cheek and tried to say absolutely calmly, "It's no trouble at all. We won't cancel anything. Now I will transfer you money from my card, so that you at least part of the debt paid. We will go to apply for the application exactly on the day when we planned, and we will play the wedding without changes and delays. The only thing is, we'll have to sacrifice some fun, but it's not a big deal. It is quite possible to do without a banquet and travel. Life is long. We'll have time for everything." Alex intercepted Tiffany's hand and began to shower her with kisses. "Thank you, sweetheart, for your support. But with a rough idea of how this whole insurance business works, it's likely that the payout will be denied or come a few years later. So it is desirable and not to count on it to avoid disappointment." The lovers sat a little more in the car, and then Alex delivered the bride to the house. Running in to visit, he flatly refused. "Sorry, my dear, I'll stay in one more place now. Maybe I can earn some money there. You and I have every penny we have now." Tiffany smiled encouragingly and kissed her fiancé. "Alex, just don't overwork yourself. Don't work too hard." At home, Tiffany told Maggie's mom about the trouble Alex had gotten into and asked, "Do you think maybe we should hire a lawyer to at least try to reduce the amount of damages allegedly caused by Alex?" Maggie was shocked. She had been so taught by her father, Tiffany's grandfather, that a real man tried not to burden a woman he cared about with his problems. At the same time, she was well aware that the semi-criminal businessmen Alex worked for were quite capable of acting by any means necessary, often choosing the illegal but most effective ones. Alex could not see his fiancée for the next few days and warned her about it by phone. "My golden, I was offered a well-paid part-time job, but I will have to go out of town. So I'm sorry I can't even get away to drive you to and from work." Tiffany took this with complete understanding. She was encouraged that the man she loved was not desperate, but was trying to work his way out of a difficult situation. She said a warm farewell to Alex and began to think about how else she could help him. Taking advantage of the few days of respite, mother and daughter began to collect at least part of the necessary amount. They had opened bank accounts, and even if it was not enough, but at least the debt would gradually decrease. Having withdrawn the money, the women took it home with all precautions and waited for Alex to show up. The man called a couple of days later, and Tiffany cheerfully informed him that she and her mother had collected another part of the money. Alex thanked her tirelessly, and it even seemed to the woman that he was barely holding back tears. "Tiffany, my love," he said, "how grateful I am to you and Maggie. I'll probably be back in town the day after tomorrow so I can finally hold you. I'll be able to sell my car, and if all goes well, we'll have a little money left over for the party. It may not be as lavish as I dreamed of throwing you, but still." It was only after the call ended that Tiffany realized how much she missed her lover. She needed him like air, although it seemed like not much time had passed since they had met. Seeing that her daughter was still anxious, Maggie tried to turn her thoughts to something pleasant. "Listen, I've got a lovely piece of fabric in my pantry," she said. "Grandma Janie got it for the occasion. Let's take a look at it and think of a dress for the wedding." Tiffany grinned. "Mom, this isn't your first time getting married. I don't need a white dress." Maggie parried. "Well, did I say the fabric was white? It's just a lovely turquoise shade that I think will suit you perfectly." Over the cares and gentle arguments about the dress, the women were a little distracted from their unpleasant worries. After all, when the hands and head are busy with the creative process, everything else seems to reduce the scale of its importance. Maggie had gone to the store when Tiffany's phone suddenly rang with an incoming call from an unfamiliar number. The woman usually rejected such calls and did so this time. However, the unknown person or persons unknown did not persist. When the trill sounded once again, Tiffany answered. "Listening." The young voice coming from the speakers was ringing, but somehow joyful. "Hello, Tiffany. This is Auberine, Laurel's daughter. We can meet somewhere crowded now so we can avoid causing unnecessary interest." Tiffany was surprised. She didn't think she would ever have to socialize with her daughter again. Sworn friends, and she didn't take too kindly to that. "Maybe you can explain to me over the phone what this is all about." The girl's voice turned to a whisper. "I can't say it over the phone. Please, let's meet at some mall." Tiffany gave in, and soon she and Auburn arranged to meet at the food court of the mall closest to the woman's home. Back home, Maggie was surprised that her daughter was going somewhere but didn't question her. In fact, Tiffany couldn't explain what was driving her to go to this meeting. She recognized Auberine from afar. The girl was sitting bent over again, as she had been that summer evening, as if she were burdened with some complex, unchildlike problem. Tiffany walked over and said hello. "Hi, Auberine. How are you?" The girl looked up and, after saying hello back, blurted out in a cursive voice. "Tiffany, in general, I don't need to explain long. Don't give Alex any money. He's a liar." The woman marveled. "Why do you say that?" Tiffany's eyes widened. She didn't understand what was going on, and clarified. "Wait, Oberon, how do you know about Alex asking me for money? How do you know about him?" The girl was silent for a moment, then confessed. "Tiffany, in general, I'm ashamed to tell you, but your acquaintance with Alex was invented and organized by my mother. She's mad at you for some reason, when I figured it was supposed to be the other way around. So my mom decided to cash in. She said it's no good without a sucker. So she enlisted this Alex guy to help her plan. He's somehow connected to my stepfather, Archie, Matthew and Janie's father. I don't know exactly where they met, either in an orphanage or when he was in juvie. Anyway, I overheard about their scheme yesterday. Alex is supposed to bilk you out of money and disappear. He's already taken the first installment off his card. But he and Archie are sure you're too shy to go to the police. The way that Hog Archie squealed yesterday when Alex told him you'd made him another sum. He drove past without a hitch. He persuaded Alex not to come back so you wouldn't think he'd dropped everything and come just for the money. Auburn continued. I've been thinking all night and half the day about whether to tell you or not, and now I've decided to tell you. I don't think you deserve to be treated so meanly. After all, you're the only one who didn't pass me by, responded to my misfortune. Gave me tasty berries. It's not right for good people to be punished by scoundrels. What happened between my mom and you is none of my business. Personally, I do not feel anything bad and partly even consider myself guilty of what is happening now. After all, my mom only became angry with you after you met her." The woman took a deep breath, as if struggling to find the courage to calm the girl. "No, Auberine, it's not your fault. For some reason, your mother has decided to make me her greatest enemy, and you had nothing to do with what she did. Thank you so much for warning me. Otherwise, I would have been in a catastrophic situation, and I would have dragged my mom into it. You can rest easy. No one will know that I figured out Alex with your help. I promise you that." Tiffany thanked Auberon once more, and sometimes struggled to comprehend the meanness, holding a grudge against Laurel's ex-girlfriend. Reaching home, Maggie immediately realized that something terrible had happened to her daughter. She looked so lost. Tiffany emotionally recounted everything that had come to light about Alex and his involvement in Laurel and her husband's devious plan. Maggie listened to the shocking information, pressing her palm to her mouth to keep from bursting into quite fair swearing at the scoundrels. Such perfidy was very hard to believe. When Tiffany fell silent, the woman still couldn't stand it. "What on earth is this doing? Why is that nasty Laurel doing this to you? She's been doing bad things since she was a little girl, and she's not afraid that a boomerang for her evil deeds will come and hit her on the head. God, it's a good thing Auberine got in your way. Otherwise, if you happened to run into Laurel in town, who could have prevented her devious plan?" Maggie said. Tiffany cried after all. She jumped to her mother and whispered fervently. "Were you right in your suspicions? And I was blinded by Alex's concern and hoped that here he was a real, reliable man with whom I could relax, remember my fragility. Even when Andrew said he was leaving me, I wasn't that hurt. He at least honestly admitted that he loved another and cannot live with me. And this swindler for so many months put our vigilance to sleep, deceived us. How can we trust people now? Mom, I don't even feel sorry for the money I immediately transferred to him when I found out about the imaginary problems. It's just a damn shame that I was so easily fooled. Why was I so gullible?" Maggie clasped her daughter tightly to herself, as in her childhood, and tried to speak convincingly and calmly. People with a pure soul is difficult to believe that they are surrounded by scoundrels. You are scolding yourself for nothing. That Alex was very convincing, because even I fell for his tricks. Talent, minus the minus. You know, let's consider that the money you transferred to him, it's not his illegal booty, and quite fair payment for services for the repair of our cottage and apartment. From that point of view, we haven't suffered at all. So you could say we got off cheap. And one more lesson we learned: you should trust your intuition. If there's the slightest suspicion, you have to be more thorough. There were obvious oddities in Alex's behavior, but we chose to ignore them. We should have insisted that he introduced at least you to his relatives, friends, go to his work, visit the hostel where he lives, talk to the neighbors. Maggie's musings were interrupted by a phone call. It was Alex, who had traditionally called Tiffany to say goodnight, to say the usual compliments and declarations of love. But now the woman realized the true cost of those words, all lies. Contrary to custom, she was in no hurry to answer the man. She just didn't know how to go on, living, and what exactly to say to the man who had taken advantage of her gullibility and intended to rob her completely. Tiffany was afraid that Alex would realize from her voice that she had been exposed. Maggie answered instead. "Hello, Alex." Tiffany went out to her neighbor's house and forgot her phone. "Can I take a message?" Alex was polite and courteous as always. "Thank you, Maggie. If you can have her call me back anytime. As soon as she gets back, I'll be waiting. Goodbye. Goodbye." The woman echoed the male caller. "Goodbye." The conversation ended, and Tiffany looked longingly at her mother and asked, "How can you lie so skillfully? You're so polite, so perfect." I wanted to scream that they miscalculated and won't get another penny from you and me. But we have to make sure we don't let Oberon down. Judging by Laurel's skill at making mischief, she wouldn't spare her own daughter for outsiders. She'll be in trouble if anyone realizes she warned me. I don't want to hurt such a sincerely honest girl. Maggie realized that Tiffany didn't expect an answer, so she didn't hurry to say anything. In fact, she needed to think it over. The women sat hugging each other, as if drawing support and strength from each other to withstand the betrayal that had befallen them. Eventually, Maggie began to speak carefully, choosing her words. "I don't think you should talk to Alex on the phone today. Text him that you're tired, especially since it's the truth, and that you'll wait for him here at our place. He's supposed to be here tomorrow, Saturday." Tiffany nodded, and Maggie continued to share her plan. "Great. So tomorrow morning, you and I will go and deposit the money in the bank. Then I'll ask a coworker to come along as a power backup," Maggie continued. "I think that if you confidently tell Alex that you can no longer support him financially, he won't insist or influence us in any way. Of course, ideally not to drag him home, but somewhere in a cafe to meet. Then I personally see two options. Either immediately shock him with the news that his fraud has been uncovered, but then his reaction could be unpredictable. What if he starts fighting? A more interesting game will turn out if you have a little fun, that is. And to lead Alex by the nose. Lie, for example, that the money was urgently transferred to the treatment of a child seen on TV. I think that would be a terrible blow to him. What do you think?" Tiffany's eyes twinkled with malice. "Mom, I have another idea. Remember those joke bank bills we had lying around that you got at work for your birthday as a joke? I suggest we give Alex a packet of fake money. I don't think he's going to authenticate the loot in front of us. And when he gets to his lair with it, I wonder how he'll defend himself to his accomplices. I doubt Laurel will believe him if he says he got those papers from me. I mean, she thinks I'm a sucker. I think I'm guaranteed a showdown with Alex." Maggie approved of her daughter's plan. "That's a neat idea. I wouldn't have thought of that. But I don't want to see him in our apartment anyway. Why don't we run into him somewhere on the way to the cottage? You'll give him the money and we'll go to the cottage. Even if there's no work there now, except to put snow in the tank. But I think we'll feel better in the air. Physical labor will help take our minds off things." Tiffany agreed and then added, "Mom, we should probably change the locks first, just to be safe. Remember, I gave Alex the sets for the apartment and the cottage just in case." The woman responded instantly. Maggie approved of her daughter. "Good for you, good thinking. I'll call Valentin Antonovich and ask him to help." While Maggie was making arrangements with her colleague, Tiffany watched with unexpected joy as her mother's cheeks blushed sweetly during what seemed to be a very serious, not romantic, conversation. At least let her be lucky and love, the woman thought. Mom deserved to have a holiday on her street too. Otherwise, I can't understand where justice is in life at all. Valentin Antonovich quickly got to his colleague's apartment and soon was already dealing with the task at hand. Watching the working man and her mother, Tiffany clearly noticed that there was a strong mutual sympathy between them. Valentin did not refuse to have dinner at the hospitable apartment or to go to the dacha together the next morning. Maggie briefly, without details, told about the upcoming event, and the man said sternly, The idea is great, but still, for the sake of order, I would still to the police to file a fraud report. At least maybe these swindlers are still wanted for some crimes. And in general, if they are not even brought to justice, so at least they'll grind their nerves. That's good. After Maggie saw the guest off, Tiffany asked her mother, "Did you notice the looks Valentin Antonovich was throwing at you?" The woman was visibly embarrassed. "Oh, you say that too, we're just buddies. Though of course I like him very much. But I somehow already got used to live without a man in my space. Even somehow I remember with horror what it was like constantly ironing shirts, looking for paired socks, cooking with huge pots. No, that kind of selflessness mode is only possible when there is love or strong financial motivation. Why are you looking at me like that, daughter?" Alas, but in today's world, financial backing is the perfect fertilizer, you might say, for romantic relationships. A very happy partnership can be cultivated. Pardon the gardening comparisons. Tiffany even laughed. Maggie, I thought you were a romantic lady, but you're a practical and rational gardener. I would strongly advise you to look at Vincent, though. Of course, I'm not very intuitive, but he seemed very nice, sincere, and in love with you." The women once again carefully considered all the details of the upcoming prank. Having exposed the con artist, who did not yet know about his failure, Tiffany began to type a message. Alex's reply didn't take long to arrive. "Can't wait for tomorrow. I'm so excited to meet you. Kisses, love. I can't wait to see you and hug you." "We can't wait to see you and hug you." Maggie grinned. "It's going to be an unforgettable meeting." Tiffany, Maggie, and Vincent met beforehand. The man told what he'd learned through his acquaintances in the burned-out garages. No work had been done to the cars. This argument was important so that none of the crooks would think that Tiffany had been told about the scam by someone in the Laurel family. The fighters for justice came to the stop, where the transfer of fake money was to take place, a little earlier. But the cash-hungry Alex also arrived early. He had to park his car a little farther away to avoid possible disputes and conflicts with the traffic police. Alex almost ran to his eager bride and her escort, greeting the stranger with a friendly hello. The groom nestled his lips against the bride's cheek, kissed Maggie's hand, and thankfully paid no attention to how the women roared. Alex then received a small package from Tiffany's hands. "Honey, this is everything Mommy and I have managed to collect. We just don't have anywhere else to take it. Unless we put the apartment or the cottage up for sale." Alex rushed back to kiss Maggie's hand. "Maggie, I appreciate your affection, but don't make such a sacrifice for me. Especially since with this amount of money I'll be able to satisfy the main part of the claims. Look, maybe I should write you a receipt." "Calling to the aid of all self-control," the woman replied. "What are you, Alex? What kind of receipts can there be between close people? You are going to become a part of our family, aren't you? I intend to entrust you with the most precious thing, my only daughter." "What's that compared to her?" "Some money. Think of it as our family budget. We'd give up everything we have to get you out of harm's way. Money's just a piece of paper compared to your health. And ours and Tiffany's, by the way. Back in the 90s, you could have lost your life for less. There's no way we're willing to do that. So go pay off those bastards and come to Ryan's cottage and we'll make a life. Boil some tea in the cauldron. We'll have a rest after all these worries." Alex hugged his fiancée, shook Vincent's hand, and hurried to his car. Tiffany and Maggie sighed unabashedly. The revenge scene they'd devised was as precise as if they'd rehearsed it many times. "Maggie, I can only imagine the fuss that will ensue when those who've been trying to scam us find the doll instead of real money," Tiffany giggled. "I know. Too bad we won't be able to see their faces," her daughter said. Vincent, watching his companions having fun, advised, "Well, to the cottage or to the police station. I'm going to file a report on this gang." Maggie looked at her daughter and voiced her decision. "Of course, the cottage. We all discussed this situation. After all, analogs on the internet searched to represent the prospects of punishment of these swindlers. The results were not very encouraging. Tiffany transferred money to a private person voluntarily, without coercion. Proving that this Alex was scamming my daughter about his difficult situation will be nearly impossible. So we'll just have to watch how and what this Alex will say when it is discovered that the bills are not real. The call from Alex came almost as soon as the trio of resourceful vigilantes reached the cottage. Tiffany took the call, putting her smartphone on speaker. Everyone prepared to listen to the hapless con artist. "Tiffany, honey, there's been an emergency. Did the bank give you the money?" Tiffany tried to put a note of excitement in her voice. "Yes, I got the money at the bank branch, the one next door on the first floor." "What happened?" Alex kept asking. "Tiffany, didn't you and your mom count the money?" The woman was indignant. "Of course. What if there was a technical error, a malfunction of this machine that counts money? Everything was counted thoroughly. Then, as I told you, I put everything in a bag. What happened?" The man wouldn't answer or back off, trying to find out the truth. Tiffany. Oh my goodness. Did you leave a bag anywhere? By any chance? Maybe you went to the store?" Maggie and Vincent could barely contain their laughter. Tiffany continued her cold-blooded mockery of a cheater in trouble. "Oh, Alex, I was so upset, so worried about you, I don't remember what I was doing." "Okay, hold on, let me try to remember it minute by minute. My mom and I went into the bank one after the other. We got cash from the same teller. Then I put all the wads in the bag I gave you today. Oh, of course they counted them. First they asked us to seal it with a piece of paper. We said no, but they gave us banker's rubbers. Then Mom went to work. She got a part-time job so she could give you and me a wedding present. Oh, I remember exactly. I went to the store." Alex sounded hysterical. "Tiffany, did you leave a bag in the locker?" The woman's outrage was almost genuine. "Alex, do you think I'm an idiot? I was carrying the bag behind my back so no one would get to it. I bought candy because I'm stressed out. I always crave sweets. Then I went home." The interrogation continued. "Someone could have broken into the apartment. That man who was standing with you and Maggie today, who was he? And wasn't he at your house after receiving the money?" It was getting harder and harder for Tiffany to stay calm, but she kept her cool, proving that she'd been in the theater club at school for a reason, and had even received a few honorary degrees. "Well, actually, my mom trusts Vincent completely. He's a co-worker of hers. He's been to our house. But he didn't have access to the package, if that's what you're implying." Alex continued to insist. "Tiffany, you're scaring me. What the hell happened?" Alex lost patience and flared up. What happened? Instead of real money, the bag contained gimmick bank tickets and rubber bands. So I'm trying to figure out at what point the real bills were switched. Come on, think back. How could this happen? You realize how much depends on it. Who would have access to the package? Tiffany was already sobbing with laughter, but she continued to play the brazen con artist. "Oh, what a nightmare. How could it be? Sweetheart, listen, maybe you can drop this package off for me now, and I'll go to the police with it. Let them, as it is called, take fingerprints, as they're then fat traces, as in the TV series, allocate and determine who else touched the package, except me." Not a sound came from the speaker. It looked like Alex was gesturing to Peter and Andrew. And after a few seconds he said, "Listen, so I tore the package to shreds out of anger and confusion. There probably won't be anyone's footprints there but mine. I don't think the police will be able to help, and even if they do, it'll take them a long time to solve this case. I've got a debt to repay. I promised I'd pay back as much as I could today. Jesus Christ, what are we going to do now?" Tiffany, wiping away her tears, replied coldly, "I'll tell you what to do, Alex. Forget me forever. And don't try to get revenge or do anything sneaky, meaning I'll go to the police and report you for attempted fraud. You think it was so hard to check if you worked at the burned-out garage? You never even showed up. So goodbye, Alex. Thanks for the lesson. Keep the money I gave you. For your efforts. How long have you been driving me around? Resourceful. Kind of earned it." At the end of the speech, Tiffany's nerves began to give way, and she hurriedly pressed disconnect, not listening to any excuses from Alex, who began to shout that she had simply misunderstood him. With a calm heart, the woman blocked the now definitely ex-fiance's number and offered Maggie and Vincent's mom. I think we did a great job, and there's reason to celebrate the triumph of justice and my release. Maggie modestly added, "Daughter, there is another occasion. Vincent and I have decided to get married." At her mother's wedding, Tiffany met Jason, the elegant groom's nephew. The companionship developed with Maggie's full approval. Tiffany, who now relied unquestioningly on her mom's opinion, allowed herself to trust a man again. It wasn't easy, but life went on. And there was no reason for her to shut herself in her loneliness because of the scoundrels who got in the way. 6 months later, Jason proposed to Tiffany, and she said yes. The story of the sneaky Laurel and the cheating Alex was a thing of the past. The only person the happy woman would like to see again is Oberon, who helped her get out of the almost hopeless situation.